You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The house with 12 chairs, rain-glazed Ashdown Lane in black shine, and at the end of it stood the Bellmar House, bright and uneasy. Before midnight, Harold Vane was found dead in Gideon Bell's study. His skull broken and the room sealed tight. Yet every guest insisted the same impossible thing. While the murder happened, Gideon Bell was at dinner in full view of them all. I was at my desk in the office on West 35th Street, pretending to improve the world with correspondence, when the doorbell rang at 8:07. Fritz had gone to answer it before I could decide whether to resent the interruption. And when the caller came in behind him, I stopped resenting anything and began paying attention. A woman in a wet dark coat can be merely a wet dark coat, but a woman who enters Nero Wolfe's office, as if she has dismissed 2 better addresses on the way there is worth a look. She was in her middle 30s, tall, spare, and handsome in the narrow controlled style that suggests old money, old discipline, or old trouble, possibly all three. Rain had laid a gloss on the shoulders of her coat. Her hat was black felt and practical, which I approved. Her eyes were grey and level. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked. "He is finishing dinner," I said. "That means he is not to be disturbed by storm, war, or a dying civilization, unless the dying civilization brings cash. I am Archie Goodwin." "I know who you are." She removed one glove with care and held out a card. "I am Laura Bell." The card said what the voice had already implied. Bellmar House, Ashdown Lane, Riverdale. A private house with a name is either too large, too old, or too pleased with itself, often all three. "What can I do for you, Miss Bell?" "Mrs. Bell," she said. "My husband is Gideon Bell." That sharpened it, not because I knew Gideon Bell personally, but because the name had drifted through the papers often enough in connection with trusteeships, museums, and the kind of civic committees men join when they have inherited enough already. "And what can I do for Mrs. Bell?" She looked at me without blinking. "You can bring Mr. Wolfe at once. Harold Vane has been killed in my husband's study." I did not sit up because I was already vertical, but I gave the sentence room. "Killed how?" "His skull was broken. The police are there now. The room was locked. Inspector Kramer has already arrived." That annoyed me slightly, because if Kramer was already on the scene, the odds improved that he would shortly drag us into it, whether invited or not. I said, "Your husband sent you?" "Number, my husband is being questioned." "Then why are you here, instead of in Riverdale, wringing hands in the approved fashion?" Her mouth moved a fraction. It might have been the beginning of contempt or a recognition of wit. "Because Harold Vane died in my husband's study, and because 11 people who were at dinner will tell the police that Gideon Bell never left the table. That would seem to improve his position." "No," she said. "It makes the thing absurd, and the police are bad at absurdity." That was sound Kramer. Likes murder best when it travels in work, clothes, and answers to its own name. Who was Harold Vane? My husband's private secretary. Who found him? I did. "Why were you in the study?" Her gaze shifted briefly to the bookshelf, then back to me. "Because I went to fetch the coffee list from the desk drawer." We were nearly at the end of dinner. Coffee list. Yes, Gideon likes to offer people a choice, and forgets what the choices are. That was either true or carefully chosen, both of which made it useful. How many were at dinner? 12 with Harold, 11 without him. Meaning. He left the table before the fish course ended. He said he had promised to fetch a file Mr. Bell wanted after dinner. No one thought anything of it. 20 minutes later, I went in and found him. "You said the study was sealed." "The door from the hall was locked on the inside. The windows were fastened. There is a second door through the library, but it too was locked." "And your husband stayed at table the whole time?" "Yes." "Could 11 people be lying for him?" "Number, could they all be mistaken?" "Number." "Then what do you want from Wolfe?" She answered at once. "I want him to see the house before the police think themselves into certainty." There was cash in the handbag on the chair beside her. I knew it before I saw it because women who come out in rain to hire Nero Wolfe after a killing do not arrive on sentiment. I rose. Wait here. When I entered the dining room, Wolfe was at the cheese, which is not the ideal point at which to introduce homicide. He looked up, saw my face, and objected before I spoke. Number, yes. Number, Mrs. Gideon Bell is in the office. Riverdale dead secretary in Bell's study, locked room. 11 dinner guests swear Bell never left the table. Wolfe put down his fork with the slow care of a man setting aside civilization to examine barbarism. Archie, why do murderers no longer possess the decency to confine themselves to people of no consequence in places I need not visit? Because they have lost their moral training. He glared. Mrs. Bell is here? Yes, and Kramer. Already there. That did it. Nero Wolfe will endure many things sooner than yield a case to Inspector Kramer on the inspector's home ground. He dabbed his lips, muttered something about the collapse of manners, and rose. 10 minutes later he entered the office, vast, yellow, brown, and unwilling, while Laura Bell stood by the red leather chair and watched him with the kind of straight attention that means she had come for the principal article and was now inspecting the shipment. Mrs. Bell, Wolfe said. Mr. Wolfe, state the matter concisely and omit adjectives, unless indispensable. She sat and did exactly that. Her husband, Gideon Bell, had given a dinner at Bellmar House for 12 guests. Harold Vane, his secretary of 8 years, was among them. Dinner began at 8. At approximately 9:20 Vane left the dining room, saying he would bring from the study a file Mr. Bell had mentioned earlier in connection with a trust matter. At roughly 9:40 Laura Bell herself left the table, went to the study for the coffee notes, found the hall door locked, entered by the library door after obtaining a key from a side cabinet, and discovered Vane on the rug behind Bell's desk, with his skull crushed by a bronze horse paperweight. The windows were fastened, the hall door bolt was shot, the library door key was in the inner lock, and during those 20 minutes, Wolfe said, your husband was visible to all. Yes, and the guests? She named them: Mrs. June Dane, Bell's widowed sister, Nathan Quist, Bell's attorney, Felix Orman, a columnist with a slick reputation, Miss June Lorette, a singer whose name I knew from theatre pages, Dr. Edwin Sorrell, Bell's physician, Tobin Bell, Gideon's nephew, Mrs. Edith Morn, a trustee of some cultural board, Leonard Crail, a dealer in antiques, Father Broom, a cleric, Mara Vane, Harold's widow, and one Oscar Pell, Bell's financial advisor, 11 plus Gideon Bell at the table. Why, Wolfe asked, did Harold Vane leave the table to fetch a file personally? Are there no servants in this noble establishment? There are 3, she said, but Harold was particular. He did not trust servants with documents. I said. Did he trust them with his skull? She looked at me. Apparently too much. Wolfe ignored the exchange, which pained me. What was in the file? I do not know. Did your husband ask for it? He mentioned after dinner that he wanted to show Nathan Quist certain papers concerning the Ashdown Foundation. And Harold volunteered. Yes. Were Harold Vane and your husband on good terms? A pause. Not long professionally. Yes. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. And otherwise? My husband could be difficult. So could secretaries, I said. She turned toward me. Mr. Goodwin, at Bellmar House everyone can be difficult. It is almost the only democratic practice we maintain. That improved her. Wolfe saw it too, because his mouth moved very slightly. Archie, he said. Coat. Riverdale in rain is one of the city's little jokes on itself. It pretends to be country while charging like town, and at night the roads between its stone houses and clipped hedges look as if money has decided to keep its distance from traffic. Bellmar House stood at the end of a curving lane behind low iron gates and a sweep of wet gravel, broad, fronted, Georgian, and lit from within like a stage set for family ruin. The butler admitted us with the face of a man who had served too many dinners and preferred none of them to end in police. In the hall stood Kramer, hat in hand, red and damp and larger with annoyance. "You came," he said. Wolfe looked at the floor, the staircase, the lamps, and finally Kramer, in that order, "against my judgment." "You've got no judgment left, or you'd have stayed home." "That is nonsense. I stayed home precisely because I had judgment. I am here because Mrs. Bell took advantage of my weakness for correction." Kramer grunted, and let it pass because the room behind him demanded priority. Bellmar House had one of those halls designed to make visitors feel either impressed or inadequate. Paneling in pale oak, portraits in gilt, a staircase broad enough for a bishop or a scandal, and enough flowers to suggest recent guests or chronic
Nero
guilt.
Wolfe,
Beyond
the
an
middle of
archway
the
to the
hall,
right,
a
I could see the
wristwatch,
dining room.
a jeweler shows full-frame
Long
watch
table,
that only
12
runs when
chairs,
someone touches it.
candles now guttering
But
low,
the best
silver and
was
glass,
here
still
inside
standing as
that
if dinner had been
the watch is
interrupted by
tied to a
etiquette.
person. The
Gideon
hands
Bell
movement
was in the
will
library.
trigger
I
a
saw him through the
story.
open door before we were
Copyright
introduced.
it.
A
Comment
big man
next
around
and I will draw
60,
part 2.
thick through the chest, white hair clipped hard, heavy face, good clothes, and the baffled fury of a man who has obeyed the visible rules all his life and now discovers invisible ones have been broken in his own house. He stood by the hearth with Nathan, Quist the lawyer and June Dane, the sister, both pale in separate styles. Bell turned as we entered. "Wolfe," he said. "Good." That told me something. Men in Bell's position do not usually greet Nero Wolfe, as though catching sight of a bridge, unless they know enough of his trade to value certainty over comfort. Wolfe inclined his head a quarter inch. "Mr. Bell, I understand your secretary has had his head broken in your study while you were at dinner." Bell's jaw tightened. "That is the fact as presently arranged." "Then arrange it better, Archie." I moved to the study door. It opened from the hall beside the library arch, and a patrolman stood there with the respectful vacancy of a man instructed to guard mystery, until superior minds arrived to misunderstand it. Inside, the room had already been photographed and officially stared at. Harold Vane lay behind the desk, one shoulder twisted under him, the bronze
Nero
horse on the
Wolfe
rug
and the
near
middle of
his
the hall,
outflung
a
right hand.
wristwatch. A
He was
jeweler
around
shows
40,
full-frame
neat,
watch that only
narrow,
runs when someone
dark-haired,
touches it.
the kind of
Open the
secretary who would
back
improve a
door.
memorandum and
Here
resent having
inside,
to. There was
like
blood in his
the
hair
watch
and
is
on the
tied
temple
to a
rug,
person.
but
The
not enough
jeweler
to
shows
satisfy
will
melodrama
trigger
murder.
the story.
By blunt instrument
Comment
is often
next.
businesslike.
Comment next
The study
and I
was
will
not
draw part
large.
2.
Desk under the windows, 2 leather chairs, bookshelves, cabinet, wall safe half hidden by a landscape, 1 door from the hall and 1 from the library. Both doors now stood open, but Kramer had the original positions noted. Hall door bolted on the inside, library door locked with key in the inner side. 2 windows facing the terrace, both latched, a fireplace with ash-cold lamps on. Wolfe stood at the threshold and looked. He did not enter at once. His eyes moved over the desk, the body, the horse paperweight, the doors, the windows, and the arrangement of chairs. "Well," Kramer said. Wolfe ignored him. I crouched near the body, without touching, and noted a small dark smear on Vane's cuff, not blood, something like furniture polish or oil. His left hand was clenched on nothing. On the desk blotter lay a folded menu card from dinner with 1 corner torn away. "Interesting," I said. Kramer glanced. "What is?" The host remembered dinner had occurred. "Don't clown." Wolfe entered the room then, slowly, and went first not to the body, but to the desk chair. He touched its arm, looked at the leather, then at the floor behind it. "Harold Vane was struck standing," he said. Kramer grunted. "That's Volmer's idea too." "Yes, but Volmer is paid to guess professionally." He bent nearer, the desk blotter. "Menu card, torn," I pointed. 1 corner missing. "Me." There was a row of dinner cups set on a side table by the library door, 11 cups, 1 missing. I counted twice, because murder will often hide in arithmetic when people are emotional enough to stop counting. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Dinner table." I went 12 chairs indeed, equally spaced around a table too carefully laid. That was my first reaction too, rehearsed. Not in the sense of actors learning lines, though that came later, but in the sense of a room arranged by someone who expects witness. Place cards still stood, Gideon Bell at the head, Laura at the foot, Harold Vane at Bell's right. June Lorette 3 places down with the singer's luck of drawing attention even when absent. Mara Vane opposite her husband. Felix Orman beside June Dane, which could not have improved the potatoes. One chair, Vane's, was pushed back farther than the others. Beside his plate lay a folded napkin and an untouched half glass of claret. I went back. Vane left in a hurry or expected to return, I said. Most people who rise from dinner do, Wolfe murmured. I looked at the desk. A file folder lay open but empty. On the carpet near the side cabinet was a tiny white fleck. I picked it up. Porcelain glaze, from a
Nero
cup,
Wolfe and the
maybe,
umbilical
or a
cord
plate.
of wristwatch.
On the
A
cabinet
jeweler
top stood a
shows
coffee
Wolfe a
service
watch
tray
that
missing
only
one
runs
cup
when
from a
someone
set of
touches it.
12. That
On
made
the
the
back,
11 cups
there
by
was
the
a
library door
superhero
less
thin wire,
decorative.
like
Coffee
the
was
watch is
brought
tied
here,
to a person.
I said.
Then a jeweler killed. Let's
Laura
figure out
Bell,
the story.
from the library
Hope you
threshold,
like
answered.
it. Comment next.
Number
Nero
coffee was to be
Wolfe
served in the
Wolfe.
drawing room afterward. Then why the tray? She frowned. That tray belongs in the pantry. Kramer swung toward her. You didn't mention that. You didn't ask about crockery, she said. Wolfe's lips moved, which is his version of applause. He crossed to the library door and examined the lock. Old brass key on the inner side still, then to the hall door, where the bolt was a simple heavy slide. Could the bolt be manipulated from outside? I asked. Kramer barked. Number we checked. Wolfe glanced at him. When did you acquire such confidence? It sits poorly. Gideon Bell had followed us in and now stood just inside the library door, big hands at his sides, face heavy with control. Mr. Wolfe, he said, I did not kill Vane. Wolfe turned. Of course not. If you had, you were singularly foolish in arranging 11 witnesses to your presence at table. Bell's brows drew down. Then what in God's name happened? That is my department, Wolfe said. Yours is to answer questions exactly. Did you want a file brought from this room? Yes. What file? Foundation trusteeship papers. Quist wished to examine a proposed land transfer. Wolfe's eyes lifted slightly. Land transfer? Yes. A property on Ashdown Lane and adjacent parcels. That landed quietly. I tucked it away, and Vane left to fetch it. Yes. Why did he not return? Bell's big face altered. If I knew that, Mr. Wolfe, we would not be conversing. Quite. Did Vane have enemies? A pause. He was efficient. That is not an answer. It is in some houses. I looked around Bellmar House and believed him. Mara Vane entered, then without invitation, which I approved. She was Harold Vane's widow, dark and controlled, with grief held so tightly it had turned into anger. She stopped at the sight of the body in the study, and then at Wolfe. You are Nero Wolfe? Yes. Then find who killed Harold. It is my intent. She pointed, not at the corpse, but at Gideon Bell. He worked Harold to death for 8 years, and now this. Bell said, Mrs. Vane, if you mean accusation, make one. If you mean grief, do it elsewhere. She turned on him. You had him at your elbow every hour, every day. He knew your papers, your debts, your letters, your guests, and your lies. The room held that. I looked at Bell. Laura Bell looked at Bell. Kramer looked at Mara Vane, as if considering whether sorrow counted as obstruction. Wolfe asked, softly enough to make it carry. What lies, Miss Vane? She swallowed. Harold told me last week that this house was full of rehearsed faces. He said every dinner here was a committee meeting dressed as hospitality. That sounds like Harold, Laura Bell said quietly. Wolfe turned. Mrs. Bell, did your husband keep anything of unusual value in this study? Bell answered first. Papers. Money. Number jewelry. Number secrets. Bell's jaw set. Every man with a house keeps secrets in it. Wolfe nodded. Yes. But not everyone is murdered in his own study while seated at dinner. He looked once more at the desk, the empty file folder, the broken bronze horse, and the row of cups. Then he said what I had been waiting for. Archie, note this. The room is sealed, the host is witnessed, the secretary is dead, the requested file is absent, and there are 11 cups where 12 were expected. Therefore, something in this house was not merely done, but staged. Cramer snorted. Everything is staged to you. No, Wolfe said. Only the parts that are. That ended the first look, but not the first chapter. We were still in the library 10 minutes later with the guests arranged in furniture and degrees of annoyance. June Lorette in silver. Grey satin looking too alive for the room. Felix Orman with sharp hair and sharper eyes, the kind of columnist who writes as if every sentence were leaning on a bar. Nathan Quiss composed and dry. Dr. Sorrell heavy and tired. Tobin Bell restless and blonde. Edith Morn stiff with moral upholstery. Father Broom large and watchful. Leonard Crail neat as a receipt. Oscar Pell oily in the financial way, which is to say trying hard to seem plain. Wolfe took them in with one sweep of the eye and asked the only question that mattered first. Which of you noticed Harold Vane leave the table? All said they had, though few could describe the moment with precision. And which of you saw Gideon Bell leave it before Mrs. Bell rose? None of them had. He nodded. Good. That gives us our impossibility honestly, which is more than most cases can claim. Nobody liked that, because once an impossibility is admitted in Wolfe's presence, it stops being decorative and becomes labor. Outside, the rain had begun again, fine and steady against the library windows. Inside Bellmar House, the 12 chairs waited in the dining room, like a diagram someone had drawn too carefully. Before midnight, a
Nero
man had
Wolfe,
gone from
the
one of them
musical chord of
to a
the
locked
wristwatch.
study and
The
died
jeweler
there.
shows Wolfe a watch
11
that
people
only
had watched the
runs when
host
someone
remain
kisses
in
it.
plain sight.
Open the bell,
One
and
file had
inside,
vanished.
hear thin
One
light
cup had
like
gone missing.
the
And
watch is
Nero
tied to a
Wolfe,
person.
who hates leaving his
Jeweler
chair at
thinks
home and
that's
hates
really
locked
end of
rooms
the story.
everywhere, had
Hope
begun
you
looking
liked
pleased
it.
enough to be
Comment
dangerous.
next, and I will draw
That is how
part
the
2.
business started. Chapter 2. A table full of certainty. The guests repeated the night in smooth, matching pieces, each course remembered as neatly as a prayer. Soup at 8, roast at past, pudding near 9, then coffee and talk under candlelight. Their confidence made the story sound solid, but to Wolfe it sounded polished, and polished things often hide scratches. An alibi with too many witnesses can feel less like truth and more like a performance that has learned its lines. If you have spent as many years as I have in rooms where murder has interrupted digestion, you learn to respect one thing above all others: confusion. Honest witnesses are often foggy, contradictory, embarrassed by their own memory, and apt to discover, after 12 minutes and a nudge, that what they swore to was actually what they inferred. A room full of people who remember everything in order is not impossible, but it is suspiciously convenient. Bellmar House gave us convenience by the serving spoon. Wolfe had them all in the library because the study, with Harold Vane on the rug and Dr. Vollmer doing his patient funeral work, was no place for a recital. The library was long, panelled, expensive, and a little too pleased with leather.
Nero Wolfe, and
Lamps
the
were
umbilical
shaded
cord
low,
of
rain
wristwatch.
slid down the
A
windows
jeweler
toward the
shows
terrace.
Wolfe a watch
The
that
guests
only
sat
runs
or
when
stood in
someone kisses
arranged
it.
groups, while
Open the
Inspector
bell,
Kramer
and
radiated
inside,
hostility,
hear thin
and I
white
took
light.
notes.
The
Gideon
watch is
Bell
tied to
was
a
by the
person.
hearth. Laura
The jeweler
Bell had the
feels
chair
that's
nearest the
really
bridge
end of the
lamp,
story.
which made her look calmer
Hope
than
you
she had
liked
any
it.
right to.
Comment next,
Celia
and I will
Vane
draw part
refused to
2.
sit at all. June Lorette had accepted a wing chair and somehow made it seem she had improved it. Felix Orman lounged. Nathan Quist sat as if invoicing time. Tobin Bell prowled. The rest distributed themselves according to nerve and breeding. Wolfe took the center armchair not because he likes claiming territory, though he does, but because the room had offered it and he was in no mood to pretend democracy. He folded his hands on his middle and said, "We will proceed with chronology. You will answer precisely. If you do not know, say so. If you remember imperfectly, say so. If you improve, embroider, or sentimentalize, I shall become annoyed." Felix Orman smiled, and that would be a novelty. Wolfe did not turn his head. "Mr. Orman, if you require an audience, hire one." That settled him for the moment. "Mrs. Bell," Wolfe said. "Dinner began when?" "At 8. Not approximately. At 8 Gideon is punctual at table. Bell grunted, one of the few virtues left. Wolfe ignored that. Soup first, yes, then northern trout, then roast lamb, then salad, then pudding. Dr. Sorrel said, "You forgot the sorbet." Laura Bell looked at him. The sorbet was between fish and roast. "Ah," Wolfe said, "already memory becomes human." I liked him for that. He went around the room. One by one they gave the order. Soup at 8. Fish a little after. Sorbet, roast at 8:30, or close to it. Salad, pudding near 9. Coffee intended for the drawing room, delayed by conversation. Harold Vane leaving during or just after pudding. There they began shading into one another like bad carbon copies. But only shading. The structure remained too sound. Nathan Quist, the lawyer, was driest and most careful. Mr. Vane rose at approximately 21 minutes past 9. Mr. Bell had mentioned a file needed for my examination after dinner. Vane said he would fetch it and save time. Did Bell ask him then? Wolfe asked. The matter had been mentioned earlier. Vane volunteered. Did that surprise you? A secretary volunteering to save time does not surprise me. Did anything? Quist paused. Mrs. Bell seemed annoyed. Laura Bell lifted her chin. Because Harold never left a room without making his usefulness visible, Celia Vane snapped. Better that than men who make uselessness profitable. Kramer growled. Enough, Wolfe said. It is useful. Miss Vane, restrain your grief into relevance. He shifted to June Lorette, who had been watching the proceedings with the composed interest of a woman who knows she is noticed and is old enough to be
Nero
tired of
Wolfe
it.
and the umbilical
You saw
cord
Harold
of
Vane
his
leave.
watch. A jeweler
Yes.
shows Wolfe a
At what
watch
point
that
in the
only
meal?
runs when someone touches it.
Pudding had just been
Upon the
served.
back, there was a
Did he
picture
take
of
anything with
Noir,
him?
like
Did he seem
the watch is
disturbed?
tied to a person.
June
In
Lorette
a jewel
considered.
hilt and a
Unlike most
jewelry
people
of the
under Wolfe's
story.
eye, she did not
Hope you
rush
like
to fill
it.
silence.
Comment next
Not
and I will do
disturbed,
part 2.
preoccupied. By what? If I knew, Mr. Wolfe, I would charge more for the opinion. That would have irritated me from another mouth. From hers it sounded like survival. Did Gideon Bell leave the table? Once. Not even to answer the telephone, speak to a servant, or improve the company. Her lips moved. Tobin Bell, the nephew, broke in. Uncle Gideon never leaves table before the women. It's one of the laws engraved over the sideboard. That earned him a look from Bell capable of curdling varnish. Wolfe made a note. Interesting. Rules provide structure. Structure provides opportunity. Kramer muttered. You can make a creed out of gravy. Yes, Wolfe said. A pity you cannot make inquiry out of impatience. I bit the inside of my cheek and kept writing. The widow June Dane, Bell's sister, remembered the courses so perfectly that I distrusted her before Wolfe did. She had a pale, composed face, too much jewelry for grief of any kind, and the crisp voice of a woman who has been correcting servants since infancy. Soup was exactly at 8, because Gideon remarked that punctuality was the last refuge of civilized people. The trout was served at 14 minutes past 8, because Felix Orman made a joke about fish arriving like subpoenas. The sorbet came at 24 past, roast at 32. I recall it because Tobin asked for mint jelly, and was told there was none. Tobin Bell said, There never is. Then stop asking, she returned. Wolfe watched her with visible interest. Mrs. Dane, your memory is admirable. Thank you. It should not be. That checked her, he went on. You remember not merely sequence but minute marks, incidental remarks, and table requests in an evening that ends with a corpse in your brother's study. It is possible, but not attractive. How did you fix the times? She hesitated for the first time, the clock in the dining room, which you consulted repeatedly. Then perhaps you improved. Her mouth thinned, perhaps. Good. Improvement is more forgivable when confessed early. That was Wolfe's way of gently laying a brick in the wall. Father Broom admitted more uncertainty. He remembered saying Grace, the fish, a dispute between Orman and Edith Morn over some museum acquisition, and Harold Vane leaving his chair. But he could not have sworn to minutes. I approved of him at once and suspected him less on general principles. Edith Morn remembered almost as well as Sybil Dane, but with more moral embroidery, which made her less useful. Oscar Pell, the financial advisor, remembered everything except what Harold had said, which made him careful in the wrong places. Leonard Crail remembered the silver and the wines better than the people. That was either honesty or habit. With antique dealers, it often amounts to the same thing. Then Wolfe came to Felix Orman. Orman had one of those bright faces that look better in print than by lamplight. Hair slicked too carefully, smile too prompt, eyes trained to turn observation into merchandise. He crossed his legs and gave Wolfe the expression columnists reserve for men they expect to quote later. "You saw Bell remain at the table?" "Yes." "All evening, from soup to the interruption." "Did you watch him continuously?" "No one watches anyone continuously at dinner, unless in love or debt. Then your certainty is inference." "No," Orman said. "It is accumulation." Wolfe nodded. "That is a phrase a man uses when he wishes his guest to sound educated." A faint flush came and went. "I know what I saw. You know what you assembled. That may be enough or not. Did Harold Vane speak to you before leaving?" "Number to anyone," he said. "I'll fetch it now, and spare us all paper after coffee." Celia Vane turned sharply. "That sounds like Harold." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "because it makes him competent and the others burdensome." That almost improved the room when they had all gone through the chronology. Wolfe had me read it back. It sounded neat enough to be filed in a bank vault. Soup at 8 fish, sorbet, roast, salad, pudding, Harold rising a little after 9. 20, Bell at table all the while, under 11 pairs of eyes and one wife's. The confidence of it was oppressive. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. This is one of the moments that amateurs misread. They think he is resting. He is not. He is allowing the facts to stand in a line and betray their posture. At length he opened his eyes and said, "The chronology is too smooth." Kramer snorted. "Because people remember dinner." "Number because they remember the same dinner." Quist said, "There was only one." "Yes, but in 11 accounts it should have suffered 11 different indignities. Instead, the sequence remains polished. The times vary only decorously. The details support rather than disrupt. That is not memory under strain. It is memory under discipline." Tobin Bell gave a short laugh. "You think we rehearsed it?" Wolfe looked at him. "Did you?" "Number. Then someone else did the discipline for you." Laura Bell spoke quietly. "Routine." Heads turned. Wolfe inclined his head. "Explain." She folded her hands. "Bellmar House runs on schedules. Dinner at 8 means dinner at 8. Gideon values order. Harold valued order. The servants value continued employment, so courses come on time, remarks recur. Habits repeat. We remember because the structure is familiar." Wolfe grunted. "Better." "A house trained to regularity produces witnesses who mistake custom for observation," I said. "So they remember what usually happened and fit last night into it." "Yes," Felix Orman said. "That doesn't make Bell any less present." "No," Wolfe said, "but it makes your certainty cheaper." That pleased me, because Bell's alibi was still intact but no longer upholstered. I went back to the dining room alone for a look at the clock Laura Bell had mentioned. It stood on the mantel over the sideboard, French, gilt, and offensively accurate to the minute. At least now. Beside it was a silver bowl with 12 menu cards, one missing. We had one torn on the study desk. On the floor near Harold Vane's place, I found another tiny fleck of white glaze, almost like the one near the study cabinet. I pocketed it and went back. "Same porcelain chip by Vane's chair. And in the study," I said. "Could be from the missing cup." Wolfe's brows moved. "Good," Kramer said. "A broken cup doesn't kill a man." "No," Wolfe said, "but it goes where it is carried." Laura Bell looked at me. "You think Harold took coffee into the study?" "Maybe, or someone did," Quist said. "Why would anyone?" "Because people do not murder by timetable without refreshments," I said. Wolfe ignored me and asked Bell, "Did Harold Vane often serve you privately in the study after dinner?" Bell's big face tightened. "He sometimes brought papers and coffee if work remained." "They're routine again," Wolfe said. A secretary leaves table under a natural pretext, enters the study, perhaps with a cup, perhaps for a file, perhaps to meet someone expected or feared. The host remains visible. The house relaxes into custom. A familiar pattern becomes cover. Celia Vane said, "Harold feared this house." Laura Bell turned sharply. "Why did you not say that earlier?" "Because he said it only once," Mara snapped. "And because fear was too small a word. He said this house listened to itself." That one landed, Bell moved, only slightly, but enough, Wolfe said. "Miss Vane, when did he say it?" "3 days ago," he said. "Dinners here were never meals, only arrangements." Ormond murmured, "That sounds like Harold too." Wolfe's head turned. "You knew him well." "Number, you say that quickly." "I knew his type." A deplorable phrase. Ormond spread a hand. Competent man. Silent. Saw too much. Said too little until it mattered. Did it matter now? Ormond looked at Bell, then away. "Apparently. That gave me something to keep warm for later." Dr. Sorrell supplied the first, really useful crack. He admitted that between roast and salad Bell had asked the butler whether coffee should be held because Quist and he expected papers afterward.
Nero Wolfe and
That
the
meant the
umbilical
file and
cord
the possibility of later work had been
Angelo
planted
shows
before
fully
Harold
a
rose from the
watch that
table.
only runs when someone
Good.
touches it.
A planted
Open the
expectation is
back,
never to be
there was a
wasted.
hair-thin wire.
And who heard this?
The watch is tied to a
Wolfe
person.
asked.
Then Angelo killed
Several
to lay
had.
out the
Again,
story.
Wolfe said
Hope you
softly.
like it.
The same
Comment
supporting
next, and
detail.
I will drop
The
part
alibi
two.
is not merely witnessed, it is furnished. Kramer's head came up. By Bell, perhaps. Or by the house itself. I do not yet know whether Gideon Bell is author, actor, or audience. Bell, who had borne most of this in thick silence, said suddenly, "Wolfe, if you suspect I arranged my own innocence, say so plainly." Wolfe looked at him. "Very well. I suspect everyone in this house of arranging something. The question is scale." That stopped even Ormond. By then it was after 11. The guests had been repeating soup, fish, roast, and pudding until I thought I might dream in courses. But Wolfe had what he wanted. Not the breaking of Bell's alibi, not yet, but the reduction of its dignity. It was no longer 11 independent memories. It was one household rhythm echoed 11 times. As we were preparing to leave the library for another look at the study, Laura Bell said, "Mr. Wolfe." He turned. "You think the table itself is part of it?" "Yes." "Why?" He glanced toward the dining room, where the candles had burned low around the 12 chairs. "Because 12 chairs too carefully arranged, a dinner too perfectly timed, and witnesses
Nero
too
Wolfe
smooth in
and the
recollection
umbilical cord
do not
officially
suggest
squashed.
accident.
Angelo shows
They
fully a
suggest that
watch
someone in
only runs
Bellmar
when
House
someone
values
touches it.
composition."
Open the back,
"Composition
there
of
was a
what?"
hair-thin
Quist
wire,
asked.
like
Wolfe's
the
mouth
watch is
moved.
tied to a person.
Of
Angelo
certainty.
killed
And that, as I
to lay
wrote
out
it
the
down
story.
later in the office,
Hope you
while
like
Wolfe
it.
drank beer
Comment
and refused
next, and I
comment,
will drop part
was
two.
the center of the second chapter. Not the impossible murder in the locked study, though that still stood. Not even Gideon Bell's stubborn visibility at dinner. It was the table itself, the polished sequence, the repeated confidence, the sense that the evening had not merely been lived but set, like a dinner service laid out by hands that cared very much how it would look when remembered. At Bellmar House, certainty had too many witnesses, and Nero Wolfe, who trusts disorder the way bankers trust ledgers, had begun to dislike that very much. Chapter 3, The Widow in Green Silk. Harold's widow, Mara Vane, grieved with the careful stillness of someone guarding more than sorrow. She admitted Harold came to Bellmar House to confront Gideon over missing money and buried contracts. Their daughter Elsie hinted that Harold kept a black ledger full of names, dates, and proof strong enough to ruin a man. Around them, Bell's sister June, his nephew Tobin, and the servants all seemed to know a fragment of the same broken secret. At 11:30, with the rain still needling the terrace windows and Bellmar House, settling into that strained hush rich houses achieve, when scandal has entered but not yet chosen a chair, the widow arrived. She came in wearing green silk under a black coat, and I understood at once why Harold Vane, who had looked made of narrow files and sharpened pencils, had married late and probably with surprise. Vane was not young, but youth would only have weakened her. She had a long face, dark hair drawn smooth, and eyes so steady they looked less like courage than selection. She had been crying. The proof was there if you knew where to look. But she had finished with that before reaching the front door. Gideon Bell, standing near the library mantel, moved half a step toward her. She stopped him with one glance. "You sent for me," she said. "I did not," Bell answered. Kramer said. "I did. Sit down, Mrs. Vane." She sat, but not because Kramer had ordered it. She sat because standing would have made her theatrical, and she had no intention of giving the room that advantage. She folded her gloves in her lap and looked first at Wolfe, then at me, then at the others. When her gaze passed over June Dane, the sister, and Tobin Bell, the nephew, it altered by a shade. "Not fear, recognition, and no pleasure in it," Wolfe said. "Mrs. Vane, I am Nero Wolfe. Your husband is dead." "Yes," she said. "The house has made that plain. Did he tell you why he was dining here tonight?" "Yes." That improved the air immediately. Bell stiffened. Quist the lawyer stopped arranging his face. June Dane looked down at her clasped hands, and Tobin Bell, who had been leaning against the bookcase with a young man's careless elbows, came away from it, as if the wood had grown hot. Wolfe said,
Nero Wolfe,
"Then
the
tell me."
umbilical cord of his
Vane
watch.
did not
The
hurry.
jeweler shows
Harold
Wolfe a
came to
watch
confront
that
Mr.
only
Bell
runs when
over
someone
missing
touches
money.
it.
Bell's head came
On
up.
the back, there
"That
are
is a
three
lie,"
or
she
thin
turned to
wires
him.
like
"Number it
the
is one of
watch
the few
tied to
things
a
in this room that is
and
not."
jeweler killed
Wolfe
the
lifted
beginning
one
of the
finger.
story.
Bell
Hope you
stopped,
like it.
more from
Comment
astonishment than
next, and I will
obedience.
draw part 2.
"Go on, Mrs. Vane." She drew breath once. For 6 months, Harold had been reviewing Bell Foundation accounts and several private contract files. He believed sums had been shifted from one holding company to another through buried service agreements, advisory fees, and land options that existed on paper before they existed in fact. Nathan Quist said dryly, "You speak as if from briefed notes." She looked at him. "My husband spoke plainly. I listened carefully." "I liked that," Wolfe said. "What kind of land options?" "Properties along Ashdown Lane and the lower parcels beyond it." Harold said the transfers were timed against future zoning action and hidden under maintenance expenditures. Bell snapped. "This is absurd." "No," Vane said. "Absurd would be trusting your secretary to discover fraud and remain decorative." That hit Bell harder than a louder sentence would have. Wolfe nodded. Did Harold intend accusation or negotiation? A pause. At first, negotiation. Blackmail. Number correction with leverage. Wolfe grunted. "A distinction with narrow commercial value, but a distinction." I said, "Did he have proof?" This time she hesitated long enough to be worth watching. He said he had enough to compel attention. Where? I don't know. That was not wholly true. I could tell because she answered like a woman trimming cloth, not cutting it. Before Wolfe could press. The door opened, and a girl of about 14 came in with a maid, 2 steps behind her, and panic, 1 step ahead. She had Harold Vane's dark eyes, and the Bellmar habit of entering a room as if secrets had seating plans. Her name, we learned at once, was Elsie. "Mama," she said. Mara half rose. "You should be upstairs." I heard them say Papa kept a book. Silence is one of the finest tools in detective work. Wolfe used it then. Nobody answered the girl at once. And in that pause the room chose sides without motion. Elsie looked from face to face, and then at Wolfe, who had not moved at all. In the leather case with the torn strap, he wrote names and dates in it, and once he told me if anything ever happened I was to remember the word Bexton. Quist said sharply, "This is grotesque." Wolfe turned his head. "No, Mr. Quist. It is promising." He addressed the girl as if interviewing children about black ledgers were a daily courtesy. "Elsie, what is Bexton?" "I don't know, a man, maybe, or a place. Papa wrote it on a card and put it in the ledger." "Did you see the ledger recently?" "Yes. Yesterday, where?" "In his study at home. Then he took it when he dressed for dinner." That improved matters so suddenly that even Kramer looked almost cheerful. Bell said, "You're letting a child's fancy guide this." Vane's head turned. Harold did not fill his daughter's head with fancy. He filled it with instructions because he no longer trusted adults. That one stayed in the room, Wolfe said. Mrs. Vane, had your husband quarreled with Bell before? Yes. In this house. Number in Bell's city office, twice. Once about the contracts, once about Mr. Tobin Bell. The nephew looked up sharply. He was around 28, fair, neat, and trying very hard to resemble a man whose inheritance had been moral as well as financial. It was not entirely working, Wolfe said. Mr. Tobin Bell interests me. Why? Mara answered. Because Harold found that certain option agreements were being executed through a holding company in which Mr. Tobin had an interest, though he claimed not to. Tobin gave a short laugh. It was the wrong laugh for the room. Claimed Mrs. Vane, I own interests in 3 companies. Is that now murder? Not yet, I said. But it's excellent conditioning. June Dane, the sister, finally spoke. She had been so still up to then that I had almost forgotten how much of Bell's face was repeated in hers, only sharpened by a woman's more efficient dislike. This is ugly, she said. Harold had become suspicious of everyone. He saw designs in routine transfers and theft in every private agreement. Mara Vane looked at her with open contempt. He became suspicious because routine transfers kept vanishing into family pockets. June Dane's chin lifted. Take care, Wolfe said mildly. Mrs. Bell. Miss Bell. Mrs. Dane, she said crisply. Though my brother prefers Bell when trouble comes. Of course he does. Mrs. Dane, did Harold Vane speak to you tonight before dinner? Yes. About what? He asked whether Gideon had shown me the Ashdown papers. I said no. He said he intended that someone should finally read them with eyes open. Threatening. Annoying. Many people confuse those, Wolfe said. I made a note. Harold had apparently spent the evening sowing the ground before his death, which is not admirable manners, but is often competent foresight. The servants came next, one by one, because Wolfe wanted the machinery of the house as much as its guests. The butler, named Henley, had served Bell 20 years and looked as if he could carry empire on a tray, if properly requested. He remembered Harold Vane asking, just before leaving the table, whether coffee had been set for the study. That was new. For the study? Wolfe asked. Yes, sir. Mr. Vane said Mr. Bell might want it there with the papers. Did Mr. Bell say so? No, sir. Who answered? Miss June said there was already a tray on the side cabinet. Every head turned toward June Dane. She said at once. I assumed there was. There often is when Gideon works after dinner. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You assumed remarkably fast. It is a house habit. So many things here are. Henley confirmed that one cup from the pantry set was later found broken in the service passage near the library, not in the study itself. That gave the white porcelain flex a direction. Someone had carried coffee, broken a cup, and tidied badly. The second maid, Ada, produced another crack. She had seen Tobin Bell in the side passage off the library at roughly 9:30, looking for matches, though there were matches in 3 obvious places and 1 impossible one. Tobin flushed. I smoke, Ada said. Not cigars, sir. I liked her too. Wolfe turned to Tobin. Were you in the side passage? Yes, briefly. Why? I was looking for, yes, matches. Then you are either a fool or a liar. Tobin said nothing, which was wise. Bit by bit the house did what houses always do if left under Wolfe's eye long enough. It ceased presenting a single smooth surface and began shedding flakes. The dinner had been too certain. Now the secret under it was proving too widely distributed. Mara knew of the money and contracts. Elsie knew of the black ledger and the word Bexton. June knew there was or should be coffee in the study. Tobin had been in the side passage where he had no business. The servants knew more than anyone had wanted them to. Bell knew enough to be angry without being surprised. And somewhere among those fragments Harold Vane had walked from pudding to death, carrying either a file, a ledger, or both. At last Wolfe leaned back and looked at them all. This house, he said, is suffering from an excess of partial knowledge. Mr. Bell knows the contracts. Mrs. Vane knows the accusation. Elsie knows the ledger. Mrs. Dane knows the study habits. Mr. Tobin knows the side passage. The servants know the tray. Such distributions are rarely innocent. They mean the secret has begun leaking before the murder. Kramer grunted. So which leak killed him? Wolfe's lips moved. The one that touched money. Bell said harshly. You think Harold meant to blackmail me? Mara Vane answered before Wolfe could. He meant to stop you. No, Wolfe said. He meant first to compel, then perhaps to stop. Let us not prettify the dead merely because they have saved us the inconvenience of contradiction. Mara stared at him, then nodded once. She did not like the answer, which improved it. When we finally left Bellmar House after 1 in the morning, the rain had thinned to mist and Ashdown Lane shone like black varnish under the lamps. Wolfe lowered himself into the sedan with the groan of a man betrayed by geography. Well, I said, as we headed downtown. He shut his eyes. The widow guards more than grief. The child guards a word. The sister guards routine. The nephew guards panic. The servants guard observation. And Gideon Bell guards his dignity, which may yet be the least valuable thing in the case. You left out the ledger. Number the ledger is what they are all guarding without agreement. That's elegant. It is annoying, he said. Elegance would be better. I drove on through the city with that in mind. The 3rd chapter had given us no killer, no neat blow. By blow, no satisfying denunciation. What it gave was more useful. It gave us the shape of the secret. Not one hidden thing in one locked room, but a broken thing carried in pieces by half the house. Harold Vane had been walking around Bellmar with missing money in his pocket, buried contracts in his head, and some black ledger somewhere close enough to frighten a child into remembering a word. That was enough for the night, more than enough. Really. Chapter 4. The menu card on the sideboard sat printed menu cards, elegant and precise, like souvenirs from a well-planned deception. Wolfe read them as other men read confessions: oyster soup, roast duck, winter carrots, lemon custard, black coffee. Then one phrase stopped him cold. Late cherries. Because no cherries had been delivered anywhere in town that week. At once the dinner ceased to be a meal and became something more dangerous, a timeline written in ink. The next morning, Bellmar House looked less like a place where a man had been murdered than like a place determined to outlive the inconvenience. That is one of the less lovable talents of rich houses. Carpets absorb shock, servants restore symmetry, and polished wood keeps its own counsel. By 10 o'clock the library fire had been laid again, the hall flowers replaced, and the dining room table stripped of all evidence, except memory, and one thing Wolfe had ordered untouched, the menu cards. There were 11 of them on the sideboard in a silver bowl, and one on Gideon Bell's desk in the study with a corner torn away, as if Harold Vane had taken dinner with him into death by the cheapest possible means. The cards were cream, thick, and beautifully printed in dark green script, with a narrow border and the Bellmar crest at the top. They had the composed elegance of things prepared by people who expect their pleasures to be witnessed and later admired. Wolfe stood by the sideboard, one broad finger holding a card at the lower edge. He had refused coffee until he had seen them in daylight, which meant he considered them worth the deprivation. I had one in my hand too. It read, oyster soup river trout with brown butter roast duck winter carrots and parsnips lemon custard late. Cherries black coffee looks harmless. I said. No, Wolfe said. It looks printed. That's hard to deny. He ignored me and read it again, slower, lips barely moving. Then he stopped at the 6th line and made a sound deep in his throat. What? I asked. He handed me the card and tapped one thick finger against the words late cherries. I looked at him. All right, late cherries. There were no cherries, so the cook forgot them. Number, how do you know? Were cherries served? No, she said at once. There were none in the house. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. That doesn't mean much, Kramer said from the doorway. He had arrived 10 minutes earlier, bringing rain on his coat and skepticism in bulk. Menus get changed. Yes, Wolfe said. Printed menus do, but one asks why. I put down the card and looked again at the sideboard. If cherries were printed and not served, either the menu was set before the actual dinner was settled, or somebody wanted the card to preserve an arrangement that never happened. Better, Wolfe said. Continue. All right. The menu card on the study desk might not be just a dinner souvenir. It might tell us when it was printed, maybe before the murder setup was finalized. Possibly, Laura Bell said. Harold supervised the printing of the cards. He always did when Gideon had formal dinners. That landed neatly. Wolfe turned. When were these printed? She thought. Yesterday morning, I believe. By whom? Harold sent the wording to the Bellmar office press room in town. It was done there and delivered out in the afternoon. Did he compose the wording? Yes, Kramer grunted. So, Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So Harold Vane chose to print a course he knew could not be served. Laura Bell stiffened. Number that doesn't follow. It does until it is prevented. Were cherries ordered? I don't know. Wolfe looked at me, Archie. That sent me to the kitchen, which was warm, bright, and offended by police traffic. The cook, Mrs. Henley, not related to the butler, though bearing the same expression of resignation toward human folly, answered plainly because she had reached the stage of the case where plainness looked safer than loyalty. No cherries, she said. Not this week. Not last. Impossible to get decent ones. The card said cherries. Yes, Mr. Vane knew it. I told him at noon. He said leave the line in. Did he say why? He said, I want the card to stand as printed. I thanked her and took that back to the dining room. Wolfe received it without surprise. There, Kramer frowned. There what? Intent, I said. Harold knew cherries wouldn't be served, but left them on the card anyway. Yes. Why?
Nero Wolfe
Wolfe
and
took the card again, because the menu card was not being used merely as menu. Kramer snorted. Of course, it's a map of Bolivia. Number, though, that would improve your wit. Wolfe held the card up. It is a written sequence. Courses in order, fixed on paper before the event. In a house that lives by routine, a printed menu is more than decoration. It is a schedule endowed with authority. If Harold wanted to encode or anchor the evening's true order, he would do it here. I stared at the card. You think the cherries line is a marker? Yes, for what? I do not yet know. But because it is false, it points. That is Wolfe all over. He does not fall in love with strangeness. He distrusts it until it earns employment. We went through the other cards. Bell's card, Laura's one from Ormond's place, one from June Dane's, all identical. The torn corner card from the study matched them, except for one thing I had missed the night before. On the back, near the lower edge, there was a pencil mark, almost rubbed out. A small figure, 920 beside a dash. I showed it to Wolfe. His eyes sharpened. Excellent. Kramer came nearer. That could be anybody's scribble. Yes, Wolfe said. And because it is on the study card, rather than one left in the bowl, it may be Harold Vane's anybody, Laura Bell said. Harold often noted, times on scraps and cards, he disliked trusting memory. That, Wolfe murmured, is increasingly clear, I said. If Harold took the card into the study and wrote 920 on the back, maybe he meant to mark when he left the table. Yes. Or when something was supposed to happen. Yes. Kramer crossed his arms. All right, let's say the card is a timeline. What does cherries do? Wolfe looked again at the printed courses. Dinner sequence. Fixed. One false line inserted knowingly. A deliberate false course in an otherwise accurate order. Therefore, either Harold meant the false course to indicate the false part of the evening, or he meant the card to prove that something after the custard would not occur as printed. I said, black coffee. Yes. Laura Bell's eyes moved. Coffee. I turned to her. What? She said slowly. Harold asked before leaving whether coffee had been set for the study. June said there was already a tray. But coffee had not yet been poured anywhere, not in the drawing room, not in the pantry service. If Harold wrote the menu as a sequence, then black coffee would mean after pudding, as usual. But if he knew something about the study tray, then the printed order becomes a trap, I said. Wolfe nodded. Or a warning. That gave the room new walls. The menu card was no longer a souvenir. It was Harold Vane's neat little piece of paper authority, printed before the dinner, carried into the study, marked with the time he left, and containing one knowingly false item. In a house where the evening had been too perfectly remembered, the card itself might be the best witness, because it had been composed before people started lying to themselves. Kramer said, "You're making a lot out of a fruit line." "No," Wolfe said. "I am making a lot out of premeditated falsehood in print. You should try it, it often leads to crime." I asked Laura Bell, "Did Harold ever use printed things this way?" "Yes," she said after a pause. "He believed print fixed a thing more honestly than speech. He once said, 'People can smudge memory but not typesetting.'" "Unless they lie in the type," I said. Wolfe's mouth moved. "Exactly." He turned to the sideboard and examined the silver bowl. Under the cards lay the printer's tissue from the packet they had arrived in. Folded inside, it was a narrow proof slip cut from the pressroom margin. On it, in Harold Vane's hand, were 2 penciled words: "After custard, nothing more." That did it. Kramer stared. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Wolfe put the slip on the tablecloth and looked around the dining room at the 12 chairs. The mantel clock, the sideboard, the door to the hall. "It means," he said, "that Harold Vane expected the critical act of the evening after custard, not after coffee, not in vague social time after custard." I said, "So the dinner ceased being a meal." "Yes, it became a schedule. For confrontation, possibly. For murder. Certainly now." Laura Bell closed her eyes briefly. "He came armed with a printed timeline." "No," Wolfe said. "He came armed with a printer's habit. Better. That is what I liked most about the chapter when I looked back on it later. Not that cherries had failed to arrive. Plenty of things failed to arrive in New York, including honesty. It was that Harold Vane, narrow and competent and dead on Bell's study rug, had left us another of his habits in evidence. He had known the dinner mattered in order, not merely in content. He had printed the order. He had left one false course on the card. He had marked the time he rose, and he had penciled after custard on a proof slip, as if telling us that whatever happened next was no part of ordinary hospitality. By lunchtime, Bellmar House had stopped looking like a house where a man happened to be killed during dinner. It had become what Wolfe had suspected from the beginning, a performance with courses. And somebody had printed the program, Chapter 5, the kitchen clock in the kitchen. The truth clung stubbornly to pots, trays, and half-scrubbed spoons. The stockpot had not simmered long enough for the hour claimed, and the duck had been served underdone near the bone. The coffee grounds were still fresh, though witnesses swore the cups had been emptied much earlier in the evening. The meal had not followed the schedule everyone described, and someone inside the house had taught them the wrong clock. The kitchen at Bellmar House was what rich kitchens usually are when money has been spent by a man who expects miracles, but not conversation. Large, white, hot, efficient, and full of metal polished into submission. By 11:30 that morning, it had also become the most honest room in the house, which made it at once more useful and less popular. Wolfe hates kitchens almost as much as he hates police stations. But truth is a vulgar magnet. He entered with the look of a man permitting insult for profit. I followed, with Kramer at my shoulder and Mrs. Henley, the cook, ahead of us, in an apron stiff enough to stand alone. "I have already told you," she said, "what was served." "Yes," Wolfe replied. "Now tell me when." "That is what I've been telling you." "Number, you have been telling us what the menu wished. I ask what the stove knew." That checked her for a second, which was enough. A cook may lie for a household, or at least edit, but she does not like being accused of lying for her own pots. Wolfe went first, not to the range but to the stock pot. It still stood on the back iron, empty now except for the cling of soup along the sides and a pale crescent at the bottom where the liquid had been ladled too soon. He bent, sniffed, and straightened. "Oyster soup," he said. Mrs. Henley nodded. "Made when?" "At 6:30, finished by 7:40. No, Wolfe said. She blinked. I beg your pardon. It did not finish by 7:40. Kramer made a noise. I made none because I wanted the answer. Wolfe pointed into the pot. The reduction is shallow. The cream line is wrong. If this had simmered to your claimed point by 7:40 and then stood, the sides would show a thicker catch, and the oyster liquor would have left a stronger grain. Instead, the soup was brought to table before it had fully settled. Mrs. Henley drew herself up. Mr. Wolfe, I have cooked for Bellmar House 12 years. Then you should be more ashamed of imprecision. I admired him for that and kept prudently silent. She flushed. There was delay. Yes, how much? 10 minutes, perhaps. Before soup? Yes. Why, the fish was late from the ice room, and Mr. Vane said the order should hold. Exactly. There it was again, Harold Vane, not merely managing the cards, but the pacing. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Hold exactly to what? The menu times, she said, then regretted it because nobody had yet said there were menu times. Kramer pounced, what menu times? Mrs. Henley looked at me, then at Wolfe, and gave up on caution because truth had already crossed the room. Mr. Vane sent down a service slip with the printed menus, not just courses, minutes, soup 8:10, fish 8:23, roast 8:40, custard 9:08, coffee to follow when called. Kramer swore softly. Wolfe only grunted. Where is this slip? He asked. She pointed to the recipe pegboard near the pastry table. It was not there, which was interesting, but on the table below lay the carbon beneath it, and when I tilted it to the light, the indentations came up like guilty thoughts. Wolfe had me read them aloud. Soup 8:10, trout 8:23, roast 8:40, custard 9:08, hold coffee unless HV says otherwise. Kramer said, That's your polished alibi. Yes, Wolfe said, not memory, instruction. The room changed shape with that. 11 people had not recalled the evening because it was orderly. The evening had been made orderly against the clock by Harold Vane himself, or by someone using his authority. I moved to the carving board where the duck remains had been reserved under Kramer's orders. One breast had been trimmed, but near the bone the flesh kept a dark wet tint that shouldn't have been there if roast had truly gone out when claimed and rested properly. Underdone, I said. Mrs. Henley's face sharpened. Only near the joint. Which means it was served too early. She took breath. Yes. How early? 5 or 6
Nero
minutes,
Wolfe
perhaps
and the
more.
umbilical cord
Why?
of wristwatch.
She hesitated.
Angelo
Because
showed
Mr.
his
Vane
watch
came in and
set
said the
on
roast
one
must
and
go
on
at once,
opposite.
whether ready or
On the
not.
back there was a
Wolfe turned.
hair-thin wire.
At once, using that
The watch
phrase.
tied to a person.
Yes.
Angelo killed
Did he
so
often
Angelo
interfere
loved
in the
the
kitchen?
story. Hope
Not
you
with
like
cooking,
it.
with timing.
Comment next
Yes.
and I will drop part 2.
And last night more than usual. Yes, I said. So the meal wasn't following the house clock. The house was following Harold. Or what Harold wanted remembered, Wolfe said. Kramer's big face had gone thoughtful, which always improves him. If the roast was rushed and the soup delayed, then the whole schedule slides. I went to the refuse pail, because civilization begins to fray near garbage. Under peelings and coffee filter paper, I found the used grounds from the evening service. They were still dark and damp in the center, not the way grounds look after standing emptied, since shortly after 9 in a warm kitchen. I called Wolfe over. He took one look and then one sniff. Fresh, he said. Mrs. Henley bristled. We made more this morning. Number this is last night's blend. Chicory ratio unchanged, and the top crust only partly dried. When was the coffee made? She gave it up completely. Not until after the alarm. Mr. Bell likes fresh coffee after unpleasantness. Kramer stared. But there were 11 cups by the library. Yes, I said. Empty enough to look used, not empty enough to have been filled last night. Mrs. Henley said. The cups were set out after. Mr. Henley told me to lay them down because the library looked bare. Wolfe's head turned slowly toward her. Who told Henley? She swallowed. Miss June. That was good. Too good. Maybe. but good. So the cups had been scenery. The meal had run late, then early, then false. The soup, not ready in time. The duck rushed. The custard, perhaps, near schedule only by force, and the coffee never served when the witnesses remembered it. Instead, somebody in the house had furnished the look of after-dinner coffee to support the memory of calm conversation under candlelight. I said, someone had taught them the wrong clock. Yes, Wolfe said, and because the teaching occurred through service, the whole table learned it without effort. Kramer asked Mrs. Henley, who had authority to alter service besides Bell. She counted on thick fingers. Mr. Bell, Mrs. Bell, Mr. Vane for papers and timings, Miss June sometimes, when Mr. Bell was occupied. Tobin, I asked. Her mouth tightened. Mr. Tobin gives instructions the way boys throw stones. Most of them miss. I liked her more each minute. Wolfe moved to the wall, clock over the pantry door. Was this correct last night? Yes, and the dining room clock. Mrs. Henley gave a tiny snort. 5 minutes fast, always. Mr. Vane said it kept guests obedient. There it was. The table had been remembering against a fast clock, while the kitchen had worked against Harold's service slip. Bellmar House had not merely hosted a deceptive dinner. It had been calibrated for one. When we went back to the library, Wolfe carried the carbon service sheet as if it were an affidavit. The company had thinned. Some guests had been sent home under caution and annoyance, but Bell, Laura, June Dane, Tobin Bell, Quist and Kramer were present, which was enough. Wolfe sat down, placed the carbon on the table and said, "Your dinner was false." Bell's brows came down. "What nonsense is this?" "Number nonsense is 12 intelligent people swearing to a timetable taught to them by a menu and a fast clock. Your kitchen proves otherwise. The soup was delayed. The duck was rushed and underdone. Coffee was not served when remembered, perhaps not at all before the alarm. The cups later displayed in the library were staged. June Dane went very still. Tobin Bell blinked once too often. Laura Bell said softly, "So everyone was remembering the house, not the night." Quist asked, "What difference does that make?" "All the difference. If the sequence was taught, then Bell's perfect visibility at table is no longer anchored to actual minutes, only to an arranged impression. Harold Vane, or someone using his authority, wrote a false clock into the evening." Kramer jabbed the carbon with one finger, and somebody told the kitchen to follow it. Wolfe nodded. "Yes, which means the alibi with too many witnesses had a stage manager." Nobody spoke. Then June Dane said, with admirable dryness under pressure, "You imply Harold staged his own death." Wolfe looked at her. "Number, I imply Harold knew the evening required precision. Whether he required it for confrontation, exposure, or protection remains to be seen. But someone else used that precision after he died." Tobin said quickly, "Couldn't the cook just be wrong?" Mrs. Henley, standing in the doorway because she had followed us in and perhaps preferred the knife edge to the waiting hall, answered before Wolfe could. "No, sir. The duck was raw at the joint, and I was ashamed of it." That settled Tobin. When Wolfe rose at last, huge and deliberate, the room gave ground to him without intending to. He looked from face to face and said, "In Bellmar House last night, the truth did not sit at dinner. It stayed in the kitchen with the clocks, the pots, and the coffee grounds. I advise you all to remember that, before your next polished recollection." "Latter, in the sedan, back to 35th Street, I said, "so the evening was not only printed, it was timed from below stairs." "Yes, and the witnesses learned the wrong sequence because the whole house served it to them." "Yes, then Harold either built the trap or walked into one already laid." Wolfe closed his eyes. "At last, Archie, you are asking the correct vulgar question." That was as close to praise as I got before lunch, and I took it. Bellmar House had lost another layer of certainty. The meal had not followed the story. The kitchen knew it. The cups lied. The clock in the dining room ran fast, and somewhere between custard and coffee, with service slips, broken porcelain, and a secretary's printed schedule in play, Harold Vane had gone from stage manager to corpse. That was not yet a solution, but it was no longer a dinner. "If I am delayed, Tell no one I ran. The street itself is the proof. Under it, and in the papers tied to it, show T first. If she has courage, then L if he has less fear than his father. No noise without copy. There it was. Not eloquent, not sentimental, not fit for framing. Elias Vane, in 3 hard lines, had answered the lie told for him. Mara read it again, then a 3rd time more slowly. I told you, she said without looking up. He was not cold. Wolfe grunted. I never said he was cold. I said he was exact. She lowered the page. Creed said Elias meant to use the ledger. Yes, Wolfe said. He did. Men are seldom pure enough to satisfy either mourning or law. He meant to use it. And he also meant to expose it. Those motives are not contradictory. They are merely human. That was the best answer available, which is another way of saying it was the true one. She nodded once, folded the page carefully, and asked, May I keep this? Yes, Wolfe said, but not the original until Kramer is done making copies. He may be vulgar, but he is correct about chain of custody. That earned him the smallest flicker of a smile from her, and because it was the first I had seen on her face, I marked it. She rose. Thank you. Wolfe waved a hand. Do not be grateful. Gratitude clogs the air. She turned to go, stopped, and looked back at him. My brother admired you, he said. You disliked fools in a way he found sustaining. Your brother, Wolfe said, had 1 or 2 redeeming tastes. When she had gone, I sat back and let out breath. Well, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. That was almost tender. Number not from you, from the case. He opened one eye. Archie, your occasional capacity for accuracy is among your least attractive qualities. By noon, the whole business had spread properly, and the last mechanical question had settled too. Creed, not Fenwick, had supplied the voice after midnight, coached by wax fragments, and protected by distance, bad telephone lines, and listeners primed to believe Elias still alive. Reporters were pestering city offices. Halcyon Urban Renewal had suspended 2 announcements and denied knowing why. Fenwick's lawyers were awake and inflamed. Archive clerks were being interviewed by men who considered paper trails a blood sport. Kramer telephoned 3 times, once to curse a councilman, once to ask whether Wolfe had truly never trusted Creed, and once to say that Creed had now improved his confession by trying to distribute responsibility among the rich and the frightened, which is exactly what Wolfe had predicted he would do. Did he name Fenwick directly? Wolfe asked. Enough, Kramer said. Not enough for me. Enough for the grand jury to start sharpening pencils. Good. You could sound a little happier. Number Wolfe hung up and frowned at the silent receiver as if it had offended grammar. In the middle of the afternoon, after lunch, and before Wolfe's return to the plant rooms, Paul Fenwick came. He had the look of a man who had slept badly and spent the morning buying advice wholesale. His tie was correct, his coat excellent, his face under strain. He declined to sit until Wolfe looked at him so long that remaining upright would have become a statement. I came, Fenwick said, because I understand that if there is anything more to be said, it had better be said where it can be weighed properly. That, Wolfe said, is almost sensible. Sit down. Fenwick sat. He denied murder, admitted greed in the broad civic form, admitted knowledge of the East, block deal, denied prior knowledge of Creed's intention to kill, and confessed at last that he had indeed wanted Elias delayed, quieted, discouraged, bought, or discredited. Anything short of the shooting Creed had accomplished for him, and then beyond him. Wolfe listened with a face made of patient brick. When Fenwick had finished, Wolfe said, You are fortunate, Mr. Fenwick. That murder requires a clearer hand than moral rot. Kramer will take what he can from the ledger and the transfers. He may yet find enough to vex you richly. Fenwick rose. You are a remarkably disagreeable man. Wolfe nodded. Yes, and yet people trust you. No, Wolfe said. They merely run out of better evasions. After Fenwick left, I said, he wanted tomorrow too. Yes, but Creed needed it more. Yes. That's the whole story then. Wolfe's eyes closed. It is the whole story often enough. Several men desire profit. One has patience, one has reach, one has vanity, and one has fear. Then a dead man becomes convenient. Late in the day, with the light thinning over the street, and the office growing gold around the edges, as it always does before evening, I found myself thinking again of Riddle Street in the rain on the first night. The street lamp humming, the shop dark, the dead printer talking through borrowed pauses. Cases don't often return neatly to their beginnings, but this one wanted it. So after dinner, while Wolfe was in the office with beer and I had no pressing duty except loyalty, I said, "Come on." He opened one eye. "Where? Riddle Street. Number, yes." "Number, you've been out twice already." A third trip would complete a historical outrage. He glared. Then, to my astonishment and perhaps his own, he rose. "You are an intolerable man," he said. "I
Nero
know."
Wolfe and
We
the
drove
milk of
downtown in the
his
sedan with the
watch.
city washed
Jeweler
clean
stores
only on
fulfill
the
a
surface.
watch that
By the
only
time we
runs
reached
from
Riddle
electricity.
Street, the shops were
Open the
mostly
bag,
shut,
there
and
was
the
a
block had
pale
resumed the
thin
look
white
it wore
flag.
best.
The watch is
Weary,
tied to a
watchful,
person.
and
They
not
had
quite
just
able to
cleaned
hide what it
that
had seen.
area of the
The
store.
street lamp over Blackbriar prints still
Click
hummed
next,
faintly,
and I will
as
drop
if
part 2.
electricity itself disapproved of old fraud in commercial districts. We got out. Wolfe stood under the lamp, hands in his overcoat pockets, hat brim low, thick shoulders filling the night. The shop front was dark now, and likely to stay that way for a while. Across the street, a window lit and went dark again. Somewhere, a truck shifted gears. Somewhere else, a radio muttered through a wall. New York does not honor the dead. It merely flows around them until paperwork intervenes. I lit a cigarette and offered him one. He took it, which was rare enough to deserve memory. I lit it for him. For a while we said nothing. There are silences with Wolfe that are labor, and silences that are earned. This was the second kind. At last I said, "Elias got what he wanted." "No," Wolfe said. "He got murder. Afterwards he got partial vindication. Those are not the same." He meant the street to answer. Yes, and it did. He drew on the cigarette and let the smoke out slowly. The lamp buzzed above us. Down the block, rainwater from some late washing ran along the gutter in a narrow silver line. "In New York," he said, "truth is usually buried under paper, greed, and noise. Occasionally one of them slips. That's cheerful. It is exact." We stood there another minute, looking at the dark front of the shop, where Elias Vane had worked, schemed, printed, concealed, discovered, and finally died. Under the street lay the tunnel, the shelf marks, the old rails, and the proof. Above it lay the block, the buildings, the men who had hoped to own tomorrow by falsifying notices, buying signatures, and treating tenants like debris. Creed had thought he could make Elias convenient. That had been his chief mistake. He managed the dead man's voice, the locks, the archive trail, even the witnesses for an hour or two. But he could not manage the thing Elias had actually found. Not merely old scandal, but the habit of fraud built into the city like old pipework. Once that surfaced, it began doing what truth in cities does when finally disturbed. It leaked everywhere. I looked at Wolfe. He had finished the cigarette and was watching the street with his face set in that expression I know well. Not satisfaction exactly, but the absence of irritation for Wolfe. That is nearly joy. "Well," I said, "yes. The dead don't speak, number, but lies told for them do." He turned his head and looked at me. "That is nearly tolerable, Archie." From him, under a humming street lamp on Riddle Street at the end of a case. It counted as applause. We got back in the sedan and drove uptown through a city already busy manufacturing tomorrow's lies. But one set had been answered. The shop was dark, the tunnel opened, the ledger copied, the fraud broken into daylight, and Elias
Nero
Vane's
Wolfe
last
and the
message
milk
finally
of
delivered where
his
it belonged,
watch. A
not to
jeweler
the
stores
police,
fulfill a
not to the
watch that only
newspapers,
runs when
not to
someone touches
men
it.
like Creed or Fenwick,
Open the bag,
but to the
there was
one
a
person who
pale
needed to
thin
know
white
he had not
flag.
run.
The watch is tied
That
to a
was enough.
person.
Not
They
for
had just
justice in the
cleaned
large
that
civic
area
sense.
of the store.
New York never grants
Click
enough of that.
it,
But for the
comment
story,
next, and I
for
will drop
Wolfe,
part
and
2.
for me, it was enough. Delete this line and everything from the unrelated story section before it. Chapter 6. The man no one saw leave the doctor's estimate placed Harold's death squarely in the middle of dinner, trapping the crime inside Bell's perfect alibi. If that were true, Gideon Bell could not have killed him without 11 people suddenly forgetting their own eyes. But Wolfe distrusted tidy conclusions, especially when they rested on food, memory, and a host who controlled both. A new possibility began to form. Perhaps Harold had died earlier, and the dinner had been arranged to push death forward in time. At 1:15 that afternoon, Dr. Vollmer arrived at the brownstone with the face of a man who had spent the morning in company he considered both inferior and noisy. Since that face is his ordinary one, the distinction may have been lost on others, not on Wolfe. Vollmer sat, declined beer, accepted coffee, and put his medical bag on the rug as if it had insulted him by existing. "Well," Wolfe said. "Well," Vollmer returned, "Harold Vane died from a heavy blow to the skull, as already known by every fool within 50 miles. The blow was delivered from behind and slightly above. Death would have followed rapidly, but not necessarily in the instant. He could have staggered, collapsed, even attempted movement for a few seconds." "Time?" Wolfe asked. Vollmer adjusted his spectacles with professional annoyance. "Between 9:15 and 9:40. 5 more likely around 9:30. "That is broad," Wolfe said. "It is accurate. Accuracy that broad is a hammock. Men rest in it." Vollmer sniffed. "You asked for medicine, not furniture. Body temperature, blood settling, stomach contents, everything places death during the dinner interval as described. I said, during pudding or thereabouts. Harold leaves, goes to the study, gets hit, and Bell stays at table in full view. Nice and tight." Wolfe's eyes turned to me. "When you say nice and tight, Archie, do you mean plausible? Number, I mean unpleasant." "Good." He turned back to Vollmer. "The stomach contents. Soup, fish, roast duck, vegetables, custard, all consistent with a meal substantially consumed before death." That sat on the desk and looked authoritative. It would have satisfied a policeman in a simpler novel. Kramer, who had come in 10 minutes earlier and was occupying my yellow chair as if it had been named for him in a will, grunted. "Their middle of dinner. Bell didn't do it." "No," Wolfe said. "They're only that Bell could not have done it while remaining physically where 11 witnesses placed him, assuming all other arrangements were honest." Kramer stared. "You want more?" "Yes, you've got service slips, fake coffee, fast clocks, and now a doctor putting death right in the middle. How crooked does a case have to get before you admit it's straight?" Wolfe leaned back. "Inspector, I admit nothing on the testimony of digestion when the host controls the table, the service, and half the witnesses' habits." Vollmer looked offended on behalf of anatomy. "Food does not lie." "No," Wolfe said, "but men serve it misleadingly." That was good enough to irritate both the doctor and Kramer, which improved my afternoon. When Vollmer had gone, leaving behind his estimate and his offended coffee cup, Wolfe shut his eyes and sat silent for so long that I thought at first he had decided to sleep through the century. Then he said, "Archie, read it." "Read what?" "The sequence." I took my notes. Soup delayed, trout on time only, according to a written kitchen schedule. Roast duck rushed and underdone. Custard at 9:08 by Harold's service slip. Coffee not actually served before the alarm, though the library was later furnished with cups as if it had been. Dining room clock 5 minutes fast. Guests remembering a polished order more than the real one. Harold leaving at what they believe was around 9:20. Vollmer says death around 9:30. "And," Wolfe said, "and Bell is still boxed in by visibility, unless 11 people blanked at once." Number I waited. "No," he said again. "That is the wrong shape. The false schedule, the printed menu, the taught recollection, the staged coffee, these do not support a murder hidden within dinner. They support a murder relocated by dinner." That woke me up another inch. "You think Harold died earlier?" "Possibly. Earlier than the company believes. Earlier than the room has been taught to permit. Perhaps even before he left the table in memory." Kramer swore softly. That's acrobatics. No, Wolfe said. It is accounting. If the evening was arranged to create a false chronology, why do you insist the false chronology contains the murder rather than covers it? I grinned. Because we're sentimental about pudding. He ignored me. Kramer did not. All right, Kramer said. Suppose he dies earlier. Then how do 11 people remember him sitting there eating duck and custard? They remember the place, Wolfe said. The sequence, the card, the service. Bellmar House taught them the courses and the pace. You are assuming equal honesty in their memory of Harold's presence throughout. I do not. That sent me back in my notes. He was right. The guests had all remembered Harold rising around pudding, but not one had described an exchange with him after roast, except a general sense of his presence. June Lorette had called him preoccupied. Orman recalled a line. Sybil Dane remembered the menu better than faces. Father Broom remembered grace, fish, and argument. The certainty was collective, not particular. Chair placement, I said. Wolfe opened one eye. Yes. I stood up and paced once across the rug. At the table his chair was pushed back farther than the others, napkin folded beside his plate. Half glass of claret. If he left earlier than remembered, the place might still look occupied in memory, because everyone expected it to be until pudding. Better, Wolfe said. Kramer shook his head. Number, you can't hide an empty chair at a dinner table. You can, I said. If people are talking, courses are moving, candles are low, the table is long, and the house has taught everyone what should be happening, especially if the man who is there is supposed to be quiet. Wolfe nodded. Harold Vane was not the sort of guest who dominates a room. A secretary at his employer's dinner can disappear socially before he disappears physically. That was cold but accurate. Harold had been one of those men who run an evening without owning any of it, Kramer said. Then someone at table had to know. Probably, Wolfe said. One person may be enough, two better, more unnecessary. Laura Bell arrived in the middle of that, announced by Fritz, and looked from one face to another with the rapid intelligence of a woman who has learned that the air in a room changes before the words do. You've found something, she said. Wolfe gestured to the red chair. Sit down. Dr. Vollmer places your secretary's death during dinner. I am considering whether dinner lied. She sat how? By sequence, Mrs. Bell. Did you look directly at Harold Vane after the roast was served? She considered. I don't know. Number, the question is whether you remember doing so. A pause. Number, after the custard arrived. Number, before you rose from the table. Number, I said. Do you actually remember Harold standing and saying he'd fetch the file? Or do you remember knowing he had gone? That caught her. Her face altered, not with fear but with the unpleasantness of correction. I remember the place opening, the chair moved back, Gideon saying something to Quist about papers, and then I knew Harold had gone. Did you see him rise? Another pause. Not distinctly. That was enough to make the room quieter. Wolfe pressed. Did he answer anyone after the roast? I can't say. Did he eat the custard? I assumed he had. It was served. There, Wolfe said softly. Kramer scowled. One witness getting foggy doesn't move the body. No, Wolfe said, but it loosens the clock. He had Laura go over the whole table talk from roast onward. We got an argument between Felix, Orman and Edith, mourn over a trustee rumor. Tobin asking for more wine. June correcting a servant about the candles. Bell discussing foundation papers with Quist. Father Broom saying little, and Harold. Nothing. Not one sharp recollection attached itself to Harold after the duck. When Laura left the chair, less certain and therefore more useful, Wolfe told me to telephone the others back one by one. By 4:30, I had June Lorette, Orman,
Wolfe
Father
and the
Broom,
umbilical cord
and even
of
Sybil
his
Dane
past.
giving second
Arturo
performances
shows
from their
social
own
watch
drawing
that
rooms
on
and
the run
offices.
when someone touches
The
it,
result was
open
satisfying.
the bag,
June
there are
Lorette did not
shells in
remember
the
Harold
like
speaking after the
the
fish.
watch is tied to
Orman was
pulse,
reasonably sure
which
he
is a
did,
guilt
which
that's
means he
the area
wasn't.
of just
Father
following.
Broom confessed he had
Hope
been watching
lightly,
Laura Bell and not
and then
Harold,
next
because he
another
thought she
part.
looked unhappy. Sybil Dane said, of course, Harold was there until pudding because his chair was occupied and because she handed him the salt after roast, then under Wolfe's dry pressure, admitted she had probably handed the salt toward his end of the table and seen it move, but not necessarily into Harold's hand. "That's nice," I said after hanging up. "Now even the salt is an accessory." Wolfe grunted, Number merely obedient. Kramer had stayed for all of it, looking more and more like a bulldog forced to attend a lecture on optics. At last he said, "All right, suppose Vane dies earlier." "When?" "Before custard," Wolfe said. "Perhaps before roast was finished. Perhaps immediately after fish, we do not yet know. That fouls Volmer's stomach contents. Number it only requires that Harold had eaten enough before death to satisfy medicine and been socially absent thereafter," I said, "which fits the underdone duck. If the roast went out rushed and Harold was already dead or dying, the service schedule still forced the table onward, while memory kept him in place." Wolfe nodded. "And if the host controlled conversation and the house controlled attention, one missing man at a long dinner might remain unremarked for several minutes more than seems
Nero
decent,"
Wolfe and the
Kramer
umbilical
muttered.
cord of
"You'd need
wristwatch. A
nerves."
jeweler shows Wolfe a
"Yes," Wolfe
watch
said,
that only runs
"and
when someone
practice."
touches it.
That one
Open the
sat.
back, there was
Bellmar
a
House was
pale
rich in
thin light,
practice.
like
There
milk.
remained one
The
ugly
watch is tied
problem.
to a person.
If
The
Harold
jeweler
died
clicked
earlier, I
that
said,
figured out the
who
story.
moved the story forward,
Hope you
Bell?
like it.
Perhaps Bell.
Comment next. I
Perhaps
will
someone
part 2.
protecting Bell. Perhaps someone using Bell's rigid dinner customs to create his innocence while concealing another person's movements. That widened it again, which I did not admire, by early evening, though Wolfe had narrowed at least the principle. The murder did not have to occur inside Bell's perfect alibi. The alibi might have been built afterward, or rather built around the body by forcing the evening to continue, correcting the meal to a schedule, and teaching everyone the wrong clock. Bell's dinner had become not cover for a murder in progress, but machinery for moving the time of death. At 6, while Fritz arranged dinner downstairs and the office lamps came on one by one, I said, "The man no one saw leave." Wolfe looked up from the notes. "That's Harold," I said. "If he left the table earlier than anyone knows, or was absent in plain sight because no one looked directly, then the whole house remembers his departure at the wrong moment." "Yes, yes." I spread my hands. "That's rotten." "It is skillful," Wolfe said. "Rot follows." He shut his notebook and rose for dinner, which is his way of telling the universe that even murder must respect sequence when honestly arranged. I stayed in the office a minute longer, looking at my notes and seeing the Bellmar table again. 12 chairs, candles, polished silver, menu cards, a fast clock, a rushed roast, coffee that came later than memory, and one secretary perhaps already dead, while the household still passed salt, argument, and appearances around his chair. That was enough to unsettle a man's appetite. Fortunately, I have mine under better control than most witnesses. Chapter 7, The Missing Ledger. The missing black ledger cast a longer shadow than the body itself, because it explained motive more clearly than any witness could. Tobin claimed Harold was alive before dinner, while June swore she heard angry voices behind the study door at dusk. Then Elsie, frightened by her own silence, admitted she had glimpsed her father motionless in the study before the first course was served. That single crack split the entire alibi open. Harold had likely died before the guests ever sat down to eat. By 9 o'clock that evening, the black ledger had become the most important absent object in Westchester County, and Nero Wolfe, who respects missing things only when they can be made to regret it, had begun treating its absence as a form of speech. We were back at the brownstone. Bellmar House had yielded its kitchen clock, its false coffee, its polished recollections, and not much gratitude. Wolfe had eaten duck in better company than memory, and now sat in the office with beer near his elbow, and his eyes half closed. I was at my desk with notes spread out like the wreckage of a conscientious explosion. "Read the list," Wolfe said. I did. Harold Vane comes to
Nero
Bellmar
Wolfe
intending
and
to
the umbilical
confront
cord
Gideon
of
Bell over
wristwatch.
diverted
A
funds,
jeweler shows Wolfe a
buried
watch
contracts,
that only
and
runs
land
when someone
options under
touches
the
it.
Ashdown
Open the
transfers.
back, there was a
He may
pale
have had a
thin
black
light,
ledger
like
with
milk.
names,
The watch is
dates,
tied
and
to a
proof.
person. Then a jeweler
Elsie
clicked
says she
that
saw it
figured out the
yesterday.
story.
Mara says he meant to
Hope you like
compel Bell
it.
first
Comment
and
next,
expose
and I
later.
will drop
June
part 2.
Dane knew coffee was or should be ready in the study. Gideon Bell had interests in one of the shell companies. The kitchen followed a service slip-timed by Harold, or in his name. The guests remember a taught dinner, not an observed one. Volmer puts death during dinner, but the meal chronology is crooked enough to push death later than it occurred. Wolfe grunted. And the ledger? Missing. Yes, that I said. You already know. Yes, therefore continue until you know why I ask. I have served Nero Wolfe long enough to recognize the trap and walk into it only when the floor is carpeted. All right. If Harold brought the ledger to Bellmar and it's gone, then either the murderer took it, Bell took it, Harold hid it in the house before he died, or someone else in the house got to it after the blow. Better. And because the ledger explains motive more neatly than any witness, its disappearance matters more than the menu, the coffee, or even the timing. At last, Wolfe said, you are nearly useful. The doorbell rang. Fritz answered, and a minute later Gideon Bell entered with the expression of a man who had made a bad decision, then decided to improve it by making another. He was still neat, still fair, still carrying himself on inherited confidence, but now with strain leaking through the polish. I want 5 minutes, he said. No, Wolfe said. Gideon blinked. What number you may have 4. That threw him off, which pleased me. He sat when I pointed to the red leather chair. I came because if this keeps widening, my name will be dragged through it by men who never had a contract more complicated than a newspaper bill. That is an ugly sentence, Wolfe said. State facts. Gideon swallowed. Harold Vane was alive before dinner. Wolfe did not move. How generous of you to concede that. Gideon flushed. I saw him. When? Shortly after 7:30, in the front hall. He had his hat off and a leather case in his hand. The torn strap case, I asked. His eyes flicked to me. I don't know about the strap brown leather. He went toward the study. Alone? Wolfe asked. Yes. Who else saw him? No one that I know of. Then why are you here now with this morsel? Gideon hesitated. Because if you're making the death earlier, I don't want it made absurdly early. Wolfe's lids lowered. Ah, you object not to falsehood, but to poor calibration. I object to being trapped under it. Too late, Wolfe said. Why did you not mention this before? Gideon's mouth hardened. Because until now everyone was busy. Proving Uncle Gideon didn't rise from pudding. I didn't see the value. That, Wolfe said, is the kind of answer a man gives when his actual reason is more embarrassing. Gideon rose half an inch and sat back down. Harold and I had quarreled. Over the companies he thought I was being used as a front in matters I didn't fully control. Were you? Gideon looked away. Not at first. That was honest enough to be worth keeping. Did he threaten you? Wolfe asked. He said if I signed another option blind, he would put names in daylight. There we are, I said. The ledger again. Gideon nodded. He had it with him once in my presence, black cover, narrow. He said it was the only thing in Bellmar House that deserved a lock. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. In Bellmar House. Yes, he said it there. And where did he keep it? I don't know. Wrong, Wolfe said softly. You know something. Gideon went silent. Wolfe let it sit. Silence is not absence in that room. It is pressure. At last, Gideon said. He hinted he had hidden it in plain sight. Where? I don't know. Number again. Gideon's jaw set. He said, Gideon Bell's house was the last place anyone searched honestly because everyone there was too busy searching each other. That was one of the better lines of the case, and because Harold Vane was dead, he could not be blamed for showing off. Wolfe dismissed Gideon with less kindness than he deserved and more than he wanted. When the door had closed, I said, "Alive before dinner." Yes. Not enough. Number but not worthless. The bell rang again, which made me think Bellmar House had finally decided to relocate to 35th Street, one conscience at a time. This time it was June Dane. She entered in a dark coat over black silk, dry-eyed and composed. As if grief were something unfortunate, but not to be worn creased. She remained standing until Wolfe made no move to help, then sat because even pride gets tired. "I came," she said, "because Tobin is a fool and Gideon is stubborn, and I have no wish to be ruined by either." "That is refreshingly direct," Wolfe said. "Proceed." She folded her hands. "I heard voices behind the study door before dinner. That put me up straighter." "When?" Wolfe asked. "Near 7:40, perhaps a little later." "Whose voices?" "One was Harold's. The other," a pause, "I believe Gideon's believe." The door was shut. The hall was active, but the tones were unmistakable. "Angry?" "Yes." Words. "Not many," Harold said. "Not this time." Gideon said something lower I did not catch. Then Harold again. "You don't own the record, just because you paid for the paper." I looked at Wolfe. He was still, which meant interested. "Why?" he asked. "Did you not tell us before?" "Because my brother has enemies enough without my contributing drama." "That is not an answer." "No," she said. "It is the answer you are getting." I liked her less, which usually means she is becoming useful. "Did anyone else hear?" Wolfe asked. "Not that I know." "Did you enter the study? Did you see Harold afterward? At dinner? Did you?" She met his gaze and held it too long. "I believed I did." "Better," Wolfe said. "That costs you something. Keep spending." June Dane then admitted one further item. After hearing the voices, she had gone into the library and seen on the study-side cabinet a coffee tray already laid for two. Not one, 2 cups, 2 saucers, sugar, spoon, cream. "That tray," I said. "Before dinner?" "Yes." "And later only one missing cup in the study pattern?" "Yes." Wolfe's fingertips met. "Excellent." June rose to go, and at the door he stopped her with a single word. "Mrs. Dane." She turned. "You said Harold told Gideon. You don't own the record just because you paid for the paper. Why did that phrase remain with you?" She looked at him for a long beat. "Because in this house, Mr. Wolfe, paper has always been more dangerous than blood." Then she left, which is one way of making an exit worth remembering. I had just written that down when Fritz opened the door a third time and ushered in Mara Vane with Elsie beside her. Mara was paler than the night before and infinitely steadier. Elsie looked as if she had not decided whether to be brave or ill and was trying to manage both at once. Mara said, "She insists." Wolfe looked at the girl. "Do you?" Elsie nodded. "Then sit and insist with precision. That is one of the reasons children do well with Wolfe. He treats them not as ornaments, but as under-informed adults, which many of them secretly prefer." Elsie sat on the edge of the chair by my desk. Her hands were folded so tightly that the knuckles looked polished. "You said yesterday," Wolfe told her, "that your father kept a black ledger and the word Bexton mattered." "Yes, you have remembered more." She nodded again. Mara did not look at her. I admired that. A mother's face can teach a child to lie faster than any threat if the child loves her enough. Elsie swallowed. "I saw Papa in the study before dinner." No one moved. Wolfe's voice stayed level. "At Bellmar House." "Yes." "What time?" "I don't know exactly. Before the first gong when the lamps were on, but the guests weren't all downstairs yet." I said, "Why were you near the study?" She glanced at Mara, then at me. "I had left my book in the library in the afternoon. I went back for it." "Who let you go?" "No one. They were dressing." Wolfe said, "Tell it from the door." I came down the side stair and crossed the library. The study door was open a little. I saw Papa on the floor by the desk. Mara's hands tightened once. That was all. "On the floor, how?" Wolfe asked. "On his side, very still." "Did you enter?" "Number. Why not?" I thought at first he had bent to pick something up. Then I saw blood in his hair. Kramer, who had come in during the last 2 minutes and had frozen by the globe when he heard the first sentence, exhaled through his nose like an engine under strain. Wolfe said, "What did you do?" Elsie looked at the rug. Nothing. Why? She began to tremble then, not wildly, but in the contained, miserable way of children who have held terror in a proper position too long. Because Aunt June was in the library, she whispered. Mara's head came up sharply. June? Elsie nodded without looking up. She was by the fireplace. She saw me. She came and took my arm and said I was not to make noise because Papa had had a fall, and Mr. Bell was handling it. She said if I screamed I would ruin everything and shame Papa. Silence again, but of a different order. Not speculation now. Damage. Did she enter the study? Wolfe asked. Yes. Did anyone else come? I heard Uncle Gideon in the hall after, and Mr. Tobin later. I ran upstairs. June Dane had not merely heard angry voices. She had stood in the library with Harold Vane motionless in the study before the first course was served. That split the case wide open, Kramer said, very softly for him. God. Wolfe did not say anything for a full 10 seconds. Then he asked the child the only remaining question. Why did you not tell this yesterday? Elsie's answer was immediate. Because Aunt June said Papa would look wicked if people knew why he had come, and Mama would be hurt, and Mr. Bell would say I was hysterical, and everyone would hate me. There it was. The whole Bellmar method in one sentence: shame, order, authority, and the management of appearances. Mara rose then, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a steadiness that made the room seem suddenly too small. She told my child that. Yes, Wolfe said. Sit down. Mara sat because he said it in the one tone that brooks nothing, not even justified fury. Kramer had gone red through the ears. I'm bringing her in now. No, Wolfe said. Kramer wheeled. No. Number not yet. She has spoken already enough to tie herself in place. Now she will do more if properly assembled. We are at the point where the family must hear the whole structure and supply the last missing plank. Kramer growled, but he knew better than to argue when Wolfe's voice goes. That quiet. I sat back and looked at my notes. Harold Vane, probably dead before the guests sat down. Angry voices at dusk behind the study door. Coffee for 2 in the library before dinner. Elsie seeing her father motionless before the first course. June Dane managing the child into silence. The dinner then proceeding under Harold's printed service schedule, as if time itself could be upholstered by silver and candlesticks. The alibi, I said. Wolfe nodded. Was built over a corpse. Yes, which is both vulgar and economical. So Bell didn't need to kill Harold during dinner. The dinner existed to push death forward, to manufacture witness time, and to let Harold Vane leave the table long after he had ceased to be troublesome, Mara said, low and flat. Then they sat and ate in the same house with him lying there. Yes, Wolfe said. Bellmar House values composure. That was the end of argument. The missing ledger still mattered. It mattered even more now because if Harold died before dinner, then the entire evening was not an interrupted meal but a deliberate pageant to relocate murder in time until the ledger could vanish, or be searched for, or be turned to use. Wolfe rose and went to the window. Outside, the city had gone dark and wet, with light from the street lamps catching on the glass in thin, hard lines. He stood there, broad-backed and silent, while the room behind him held its breath. At last he turned. Archie, he said. Telephone Bellmar House. Everyone there, Bell, Laura Bell, June Dane, Tobin Bell, Quist, Orman, and the servants who handled the side passage and the study tray. They will attend here tomorrow, at 6, Kramer. You will bring Mrs. Dane if she develops principles and refuses. Mrs. Vane, keep your daughter with you and say nothing further to Bell or his kin. Tonight the house has cracked. Tomorrow we hear it fall. That was chapter 7, and it was the one that broke the spine of the false story. Up to then the dinner had been a deceptive frame. After Elsie spoke, it became what it had probably been from the start, an afterpiece, a composed display laid over death to move it forward in the minds of witnesses until memory and medicine could be made to shake hands. Harold Vane had not likely died between duck and custard. He had died before soup. Chapter 8. The cherries that should not be Wolfe followed the false menu back to Bell's private printer.
Hope
hidden
you like
behind neat
it.
shelves and locked
Comment
drawers.
next and I will draw part
The
2.
cards had been made that same afternoon, not as records of a meal, but as tools to shape how the night would be remembered. Bell had altered the order of dishes, instructed the servants on what times to repeat, and used hospitality as camouflage. Only the host had the power to manipulate the food, the staff, the paper trail, and the memory of every person at the table. The next afternoon at Bellmar House had the strained cleanliness of a room prepared for a duel by people who would rather call it tea. Kramer had already stationed a man in the hall, another near the rear stairs, and one more where the side passage met the library, which gave the place the modest look of an occupied republic. Wolfe arrived in no sweeter temper than usual, which meant his mind was clear and his patience scarce. We went not to the library, not to the study, and not to the dining room with its 12 chairs and its careful lies. Wolfe asked at once for Bell's private office. Gideon Bell frowned. "Why?" "Because," Wolfe said, "your house has been speaking in print, and I wish to see where it learned." Bell hesitated only once. That was enough to count. Then he led us to a room off the rear hall beyond the morning room, a square business chamber paneled in dark wood, with ledgers, files, maps in tubes, a roll-top desk, and 2 locked cabinets built into the shelving. It smelled of paper, sealing wax, and expensive boredom. Wolfe looked around with open distaste. "Ah, conscience in cabinetry." Bell's heavy face hardened. "You have no warrant to pour my office." "No," Wolfe said. "Only motive, opportunity, and increasing rudeness. Open the cabinets." Kramer enjoyed that. Bell did not, but with Kramer there, and Wolfe planted in the center, like a Judgment Day sideboard. Bell took the keys from his pocket and opened them. The first cabinet contained trust files and deed folders. The second contained stationery, engraved cards, an account ledger, and at the bottom, behind 2 stacks of correspondence boxes, a narrow tabletop, press no larger than a bread box, with trays of type, a composing stick, green ink, and a drying rack. I looked at it and whistled softly. "Private printer," Bell said. "For house cards, holiday notices, guest labels, charitable acknowledgements." Wolfe bent over it. "And menu cards?" Bell said nothing. Inside lay trimmed scraps of cream card stock, identical to the dinner menus, plus a small bundle of proofs tied with green cord. Wolfe extended a hand. I gave them to him. He read them in silence. Then he handed me the top sheet. It was a proof of the menu card, but not the one served. Oyster soup, river trout with brown butter roast duck, winter carrots and parsnips, black coffee
Nero
lemon
Wolfe
custard,
and the umbilical
late
cord of
cherries. I looked up.
wristwatch. A jeweler
Coffee
close
before
fulfill a
custard
watch
cherries
that only
last.
runs when someone
Or
touches it.
rather, Wolfe said,
Open the back,
the
there
ordinary
was a
after.
hair
Dinner
thin wire,
drift,
like
not the order
the
used
watch
that
is
night.
tied to a
Bell said
person.
too
Can
quickly.
a jeweler kill?
Proofs
Let's
change.
figure out the story.
Yes, Wolfe said.
Hope you like
How
it.
banal of them.
Comment
He
next
took
and
another
I will
slip.
draw part 2.
On this one, the order had been revised again. Oyster soup, river trout with brown butter, roast duck, winter carrots and parsnips, lemon custard, late cherries, black coffee, the final version. The lie in its finished clothes. Kramer stepped nearer. Same afternoon. I looked at the corner notation, timed at 3:40, 8, and another at 4:02. Wolfe nodded. So the cards were composed here. In Bellmar House, not merely sent to the town press room as household routine might suggest. Mrs. Bell, said Harold, supervised their printing. That may be true in the trivial sense, but the means were here. Bell snapped. That proves nothing. No, Wolfe said. It proves preparation, which is more useful. I searched the drawers below and found a narrow memorandum pad with Bell's initials on the cover. 3 top sheets were gone, but the pressure marks beneath remained. I angled it toward the window light and read as much as I could. Soup 8, 10, trout 8, 20, 3, roast 8, 40, custard 9, 08, repeat if asked, coffee later in library. Kramer let out a satisfied grunt. There's your teaching. Wolfe took the pad, studied it, and set it down. Not merely teaching distribution. These are not kitchen instructions only. They are recollection cues. Enough to reach the cook, perhaps the butler, Perhaps Mrs. Dane, perhaps others. Bell's voice rose. You are inventing. No, Wolfe said. You are losing. That silenced him more effectively than volume. I kept going through the printer table. In a shallow side tray, I found a set of guest place slips, all neatly typed, and one torn strip from a page of notes in Harold Vane's hand. Only half survived, but half can be eloquent if it has the right words. Here, Wolfe took it. The fragment read, "Not menu but record if altered. June told to hold library talk after roast. If Bell moves coffee, note it." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Excellent. Bell's face changed then. Not much, but enough to show the first real damage. That could mean anything. It means, Wolfe said, that Harold Vane had recognized the menu cards as tools, not souvenirs. He knew the meal order might be altered, and he intended to treat the printed card as a record of alteration. He was watching the house prepare memory. Gideon. Bell turned. Stay out of this. She ignored him. You told them Harold supervised the cards in town. Bell's jaw pushed forward. He usually did. But not that afternoon. He did not answer. That was answer enough. Wolfe moved from the printer table to the roll-top desk. Its interior was as neat as a sermon and twice as cold. Bills, file tabs, foundation papers, one silver-framed photograph of Bell with men I did not yet care about, and beneath the side pigeonholes, a locked, narrow drawer. Open it, Bell said. Number Kramer said. Yes. Bell looked from one to the other, considered dignity, and lost. He opened it. Inside were three things that mattered. First, an invoice from a stationer for cream cards and green ink, delivered 2 days before. Second, a household service memorandum in Bell's hand directing that all courses proceed per card, not per kitchen habit. Third, folded twice and handled often, a list of guest names with pencil checks, beside June Dane, Henley, and Tobin Bell. Witness coaching, I said. Or witness selection, Wolfe replied. Bell said harshly, that is outrageous. Wolfe turned. Is it? You altered the menu order, you printed the cards privately in your own office. You instructed the staff to follow the card rather than the kitchen's natural pace. And you marked specific persons likely to repeat the chronology with confidence. Hospitality became camouflage. Bell's cheeks had gone mottled. I wanted a smooth evening. No, Wolfe said. You wanted a remembered one. Laura Bell took 2 steps into the room. Gideon, why? He looked at her and not at Wolfe, which was interesting. Because Harold was becoming impossible. Yes, Wolfe said quietly, but he was impossible before dinner, not after. So the dinner had to serve another function. I said. Push death forward. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. If Harold Vane had already been killed or fatally struck before the guests properly settled, then the evening required architecture, a fixed printed sequence repeated times, controlled service, a visible host, a story the house could learn and later recite. Kramer crossed his arms. Only Bell had the reach to do all that. Yes, Wolfe said. Only the host could manipulate food, staff, paper, and social memory at once. That was the line that turned the room. Until then Bell had been offended, pressed, cornered perhaps. Now he was central. The printer, the menu drafts, the household instructions, the witness list, none of it proved he struck the blow, but all of it proved he controlled the stage on which the false time of death was performed. Laura Bell said, in a voice I nearly missed, you made dinner into an alibi before there was even a death to explain. Bell swung on her. Number Wolfe's brows rose. Ah, that is not the denial you needed. Kramer heard it too. What did he know in advance? Bell said nothing. I picked up one of the earlier proof sheets again. Why the cherries? Wolfe answered before Bell could. Because they were memorable and false. A fixed impossible line to anchor the card in memory. When later the guests recalled the menu, the false item would bind the true sequence more tightly. By contrast, people remember the oddity and trust the rest. I looked at him. That's neat. It is vulgar, Wolfe said, but competent. Laura Bell had gone pale now, but not weak. There is a difference. You altered the order of coffee and custard. Bell did not speak, so that coffee not yet served could still be imagined as part of the evening while Harold was already dead. Bell still said nothing. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, bring them in. I knew whom he meant. Within 3 minutes June Dane, Tobin Bell, Quist and Henley were in the office, looking variously alarmed, resentful and tired. Wolfe wasted no time. These menu cards were printed here, by Bell that afternoon, not as records of a meal but as instruments to shape recollection. The service was fixed to them. Certain times were to be repeated if asked. The order of courses was altered, an impossible item. Late cherries was retained deliberately to make the printed sequence memorable. Bell then used household authority to camouflage chronology. June Dane sat down heavily. Tobin Bell stayed standing because sitting would have looked too much like surrender, Quist said. If that is true, then the alibi is manufactured. Yes, Wolfe said, but let us not flatter it. It is instructed, not manufactured. Bellmar House is a machine for teaching habits. One more habit was added for an evening. Henley closed his eyes briefly. I knew the cards were wrong. Bell turned on him. You knew nothing. Henley met his gaze. I knew cherries were impossible, and coffee was moved for no reason a house butler could call sane. June Dane said suddenly, I thought it was to protect you. Everyone looked at her, Bell said. June. No, she said. If this is to be filleted, let it be done thoroughly. I thought Harold had fallen, or been struck in a struggle before dinner, and that you were trying to save the house until Quist could advise. Then it became too late to stop. Quist's face tightened. I advised no such thing. Because you arrived after the first lie had begun, Wolfe said. Tobin Bell finally spoke too fast. Uncle Gideon didn't tell me Harold was dead. He only said there had been an accident, and the evening must proceed until matters were in hand. There, Wolfe said. Told the wrong thing to the wrong people in the wrong order. The host relied on obedience first, explanation later. Bell's face had gone from mottled to grey. For the first time since I had seen him, he looked old rather than powerful. Laura Bell said, Did you kill him? Silence. Wolfe did not help him. That is one of his better cruelties. When truth is ready, he lets the guilty man hear how alone he is before offering structure. Bell said at last. Number Wolfe nodded once. Good. We are not yet at the end. And a clumsy confession here would only insult the work. Kramer stared. You don't believe him. I believe he printed the evening, arranged the house, and moved memory like furniture. Whether he also struck Harold Vane is the next question. It is not automatically the same one. That irritated Kramer profoundly, which is how I knew Wolfe was right to separate them, because that was the point at the end of the 8th chapter. Bell had the power, beyond doubt, to manipulate food, staff, paper, timing, and recollection. He could turn hospitality into structure and structure into camouflage. He had printed the cards himself, altered the order of dishes, seeded the servants with times, and used the entire dinner as a machine for teaching witnesses what to remember later. But even then, Wolfe was not ready to say Bell had killed Harold. Only that Bell had prepared the memory of the night. And a man who prepares memory is already too close to murder for comfort. Chapter 9. The last toast. Wolfe gathered them all once more in the dining room, where the lie had first been served under silver and candlelight. There he rebuilt the evening piece by piece, stripping away confidence until only sequence remained. Harold had come to expose Bell with the ledger. Bell had struck him before dinner, and the body was left waiting for a later discovery. The dinner party had never been an alibi at all. It was a stage play designed by the host to move the apparent time of death forward and protect himself long enough to hide the ledger. At 6 o'clock that evening, the dining room at Bellmar House was lit again, not for dinner. Fritz would have regarded that as barbarism by imitation. But the candles were set, the silver drawn back into place, and the 12 chairs restored around the table as if the house, having once lied with them, was now required to listen with them. Nero Wolfe had insisted on the room. He said the truth ought to be spoken where the falsehood had first been fed.
Nero Wolfe,
And though
the
the sentence pleased
record
him
of
more than it
his
pleased
watch.
anyone
A
else,
jeweler
he
shows
was
Wolfe
right.
a watch that only
Kramer
runs
came
when
with
someone
Pearlie
touches it.
and two plainclothes
Open the
men,
back,
which
there
gave the
was
hall a harder
lengthy
edge than
wire
Bellmar
black.
preferred.
The watch is
Nathan
tied
Quist
to a
was there,
person.
dry
A
and
jeweler
unhappy.
killed. Let's
Laura
figure
Bell,
out the
pale and
story.
erect. June
Hope you
Dane,
like it.
composed now
Comment
only by
next, then I will
force.
draw
Tobin
part 2.
Bell, who had used all available afternoon to look respectable, and had failed Felix Orman with the bright corpse. Like curiosity of his profession, Dr. Sorrel, Edith Morn, Father Broom, Leonard Crail, Oscar Pell, and June Lorette, all brought back to sit where they had sat before. Mara Vane came, though she had no obligation except grief and interest, and she brought Elsie only as far as the library, where Laura Bell kept her with unexpected gentleness. Gideon Bell entered last. He did not look beaten. Men like Bell do not beat neatly. But the heavy assurance had left him. He seemed larger physically and smaller in every other way, which is one of the few honest proportions shame produces. Wolfe took the place at one end of the table that had belonged to Gideon Bell 2 nights before. I stood by the sideboard with my notebook. Kramer stood by the mantel, red and watchful. The others sat in the chairs memory had already assigned them. Wolfe looked down the table once, not hurrying. The menu cards had been returned to each setting by his order. Their cream surfaces, green script, and impossible cherries lay there like little printed insults. "Good evening," he said. "You have already dined once in this room under instruction. Tonight you will listen under compulsion. The difference is not always flattering, but it is useful." No one answered. Bellmar House had learned enough by then not to interrupt the opening movement. Wolfe rested his hands on the tablecloth and began. Harold Vane did not die during dinner. He died before it. The estimate placing death in the midst of the meal was made plausible by a meal whose sequence, timing, and recollection had been deliberately arranged to push the apparent time of death forward. Bell's perfect alibi was therefore not a shield formed spontaneously by 11 witnesses. It was a piece of household engineering, Bell said. "You are still proving arrangement, not murder." Wolfe inclined his head. Patience, men are often more fully destroyed by sequence than by accusation. He lifted one menu card. These were printed in Gideon Bell's private office that afternoon, not merely prepared as souvenirs of hospitality. Multiple proofs were run. The order of courses was altered. Coffee and custard changed places. An impossible item, late cherries, was inserted and retained despite the known absence of cherries in the house, or, for that matter, in civilized commerce that week. Bell instructed the servants to follow the printed order rather than kitchen habit. Times were fixed and repeated. The dining room clock ran fast. The butler, the cook, and others were taught a false sequence. Why? He let that sit. Because Harold Vane was already dead or dying before soup, and the house needed to carry him socially beyond the hour of his death.
Nero
June
Wolfe,
Dane made a
the
small
record
sound,
of his
not
watch.
denial,
A jeweler
not
shows
assent.
Wolfe a watch that only
Bell did
runs
not
when
move.
someone touches it.
Wolfe continued. Let us
Open the
rebuild
back,
the
there
evening.
was a huge
Harold Vane
wire
arrived
black.
carrying a leather
The
case
watch is tied
containing,
to a
among
person.
other
A
things,
jeweler
a
killed.
black
Let's
ledger.
figure out the story.
That ledger held the
Hope you like
names,
it.
dates, and
Comment
documentary
next, then I
cross,
will draw part 2.
references connecting diverted Bell Foundation money, shell options, and anticipated land transfers along Ashdown Lane. He intended to confront Gideon Bell with it. Not purely from virtue. Mrs. Vane has been candid enough to admit he intended leverage first, exposure second, but exposure remained in the account. Mara Vane said nothing. She did not need to. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward Bell. At approximately 7:40 before guests were assembled, June Dane heard angry voices behind the study door. One was Bell's. One Vane's. Vane said, "Not this time," and, more significantly, "You don't own the record just because you paid for the paper." This refers to the ledger. Quist stirred. Bell stared straight ahead. Soon after, Wolfe said, Elsie Vane crossed the library and saw her father lying motionless in the study with blood in his hair. June Dane was in the library at that moment. She restrained the child and suppressed alarm. Therefore, by then, Harold Vane had already received the fatal blow. All eyes turned, some to June, some to Bell, June kept her face still, but stillness had ceased helping her. Wolfe lifted one finger. That does not yet prove Gideon Bell struck it. It proves the death occurred before dinner, and that at least one other person knew. Kramer growled. Get to it. I am at it, Wolfe said. Your difficulty, Inspector, is not impatience. It is gluttony. That shut him up because there was nothing to say to it without agreeing. Wolfe's gaze swept the table. What happened next? Bell did not summon the police. He did not call a doctor. He did not even abandon the evening. Instead, he set the house in motion. The menu cards, already printed or then revised, became instruments. The service timings were fixed. The dinner proceeded. Guests sat, soup, delayed, fish, roast, rushed before properly done. Custard, coffee, not actually served as remembered, but later staged in the library, as if it had been. In such a house, under such guidance, witnesses learned the night by structure rather than observation. Felix Orman said dryly, "You make us all sound like schoolchildren." "Yes," Wolfe said. "You were easier to educate." A faint flush crossed Orman's face. He let it pass. Wolfe went on. During the meal, Harold Vane's place remained socially present longer than his body did physically. His chair, his napkin, his glass, the expectation that a secretary at such a table would be quiet and self-effacing, the host's command of conversation, and the pace enforced by service combined to make his absence unremarkable, until the moment chosen for it to become remarkable. When Mrs. Bell later went to the study and discovered him, the murder appeared to have occurred within the interval after Harold left the table, but that interval had been manufactured. Laura Bell's face had gone white around the mouth. Bell looked at her once and away. Wolfe set down the menu card and picked up the proof slip we had found in the printer drawer. Harold, however, understood some part of this before he died. He wrote, "Not menu, but record if altered." He knew the dinner itself might be turned into evidence by sequence. He was trying to watch Bell's manipulation of paper that cost him his life. Bell spoke then too loudly. "Number, if Vane was dead before dinner, then I had every reason to put on a pageant if I wanted time." Wolfe turned to him. At last, a useful objection that surprised everyone, including Bell. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Someone else did need time. But only one man in the house had both reason and authority to supply it. You needed three things after Vane fell. First, the ledger. Second, consultation from Quist, or at least delay, until you could determine legal risk. Third, witnesses to a later chronology so that if the ledger vanished and the death became public, the confrontation in the study would appear to have occurred after dinner, not before. The pageant was not merely to save your dignity, it was to buy your paper." Bell's mouth hardened. "You have no proof I took the ledger?" "No?" Wolfe asked softly. "Let us continue." He turned slightly toward Tobin. Mr. Tobin Bell admitted that Vane had shown him the ledger before and had threatened to expose names if further blind options were signed. Therefore the ledger was active, not hypothetical. "Mrs. Vane said Harold brought proof. Elsie said he carried it in the leather case after the death. The case was missing. The study was searched selectively, but not well enough to erase Harold's penciled notes. Bell's private printer drawer contained drafts and memoranda showing that the dinner chronology was engineered, yet the ledger itself was absent from the room, from Harold's home, and from all obvious repositories. Who in Bellmar House had the strongest immediate need to remove a black ledger connecting foundation money, land options, and family interests? No, one answered. Wolfe answered it for them. Gideon Bell. Bell pushed back from the table a fraction. Still inference. "No," Wolfe said. "Now structure. Consider the coffee tray. June Dane saw a tray for two in the library before dinner. Harold expected coffee in the study and asked after it. Why for two? Because Bell and Vane were to speak privately before or after dinner over papers. The confrontation occurred early. Bell struck Vane, whether in anger, panic, or calculation, may matter to his soul, not to us. June Dane discovered enough to know silence was required. Then Bell made the one decision that destroys him. He chose not concealment, but choreography. June Dane shut her eyes. Wolfe did not spare her. You helped. At first perhaps out of family loyalty, perhaps because you believed the matter could be contained. You told the child to keep quiet. You instructed or confirmed coffee arrangements. You knew where the body lay while your brother's guests took soup. You may not have approved. You obeyed. June opened her eyes and looked at Bell. Yes, she said. It was the first outright admission from anyone but a frightened child, and it moved through the room like a cold draught. Bell turned on her. June, no, she said. You had already done it. I could not unstrike him. Wolfe inclined his head. Quite, you could only help with the sequel. Kramer shifted his weight. Pearlie's eyes never left Bell, Wolfe resumed. Bell altered the menu order and service because he understood houses. He used hospitality as camouflage. The guests, seeing what was put before them and hearing what was repeated, built the evening around the host's script that made the table not an alibi, but a stage play, and only the host knew every cue. Quist spoke then, and his dryness had gone brittle. You have still left open whether Bell meant the blow to kill. Wolfe looked at him as if at a chair asking a question. Mr. Quist, a heavy bronze paperweight applied to the back of a man's head in a locked study, is rarely therapeutic. A faint sound, almost a laugh, escaped June Lorette despite herself. It died at once. Bell rose. It was not theatrical. He simply stood, because staying seated would have meant allowing the whole thing to settle over him like cloth. His big hands were flat on the table. I did not design a play, he said. I designed time. There it was. No one moved. Even Kramer waited, because Wolfe had taught the room that speech now cost more than silence. Bell went on, voice lower. Harold came with the ledger and with demands. Not one demand. Many, he had names, dates, transfers, old papers. Some of it was as he said. Some of it he only half understood. He wanted me to unwind contracts already in motion, expose options already signed, sacrifice Tobin and others, and deliver myself to every jackal on a board and in a court because he had suddenly discovered conscience could be made profitable. Vane said, cold as glass, better than murder. Bell ignored her. He said if I did not agree before dinner, he would place the ledger beyond recall, Wolfe said. And Bell's shoulders shifted once. And I struck him. There was no gasp. Gasps are for melodrama, and Bellmar House had used up its theatrical ration 2 nights earlier, Wolfe said, with the bronze horse. Yes, from behind. Bell's face altered. He turned away from me. He bent toward the desk. I took up the horse and struck him. Why? Because I saw in an instant what he was about to do, not expose me, expose everyone. My sister, Tobin, trustees,
Wolfe
men who
then
had
blew
signed
the
what they
call
did
of
not
his
read.
watch.
He would have
Mature
blown the
shows
whole
Wolfe
structure
a
wide,
watch that only
because he
runs when
wanted,
someone touches
for
it.
once, to be
Open
more
the bag,
feared than
and there was a
ignored.
huge
Wolfe's
silver
eyes were
bell.
half closed.
The watch is tied to a
Then the
person.
dinner, Bell
The
laughed
legend
once,
revealed. That's the
short
of
and
the
ugly.
story. Hope you like it.
The dinner
Comment
was
below
already
and
there.
I will draw part
The
2.
guests were coming down. June came in. She saw him. I realized if the house erupted at once, the ledger would vanish into police hands, newspapers, enemies, and every imbecile who mistakes scandal for correction. I needed hours, not days. Hours. So I made the house behave. Yes, Wolfe said. And you are very good at making houses behave. Bell looked at him directly then. Better than you know. No, Wolfe said. Exactly as well as I know. Kramer stepped forward. That's enough. Bell did not look at him. He looked only at Wolfe. The ledger, Bell said. Where is it? Wolfe asked. Bell's mouth tightened, burned. Vane made a sound then, not loud, but final. Wolfe watched Bell another second. Number Bell blinked. No, Wolfe repeated. If you had burned it, you would have said so at once when first cornered, because ashes are cleaner than hidden paper. Also, men who build dinners into alibis do not burn leverage until they have extracted all possible use from it. Where is it? Bell's hands gripped the table edge.
Nero Wolfe,
It
the
was over
amazing
then, though.
world of
Bell had
witchcraft.
not yet
A
admitted it to
jeweler shows
himself.
Wolfe
Wolfe
awards
had
that
not
only
merely
ends
named
when
the
someone
act. He
touches
had
it.
named Bell's
Open the
habit,
bag,
and
there was
habits
a
are harder to
pure blue
defend than
wire like
crimes.
the
Bell
watch
said at
tied to
last,
a person.
in the
The
print
jeweler
drawer beneath
paid
the
to
office
get
press.
jewelry out the story.
False bottom.
Hope you liked
That
it.
sent Kramer and
Comment
Pearlie
next
moving
and
at
I will draw
once.
part 2.
Quist closed his eyes. June Dane looked down at the candles. Tobin Bell seemed to shrink in the chair without actually lowering himself. Laura Bell remained absolutely still, which was the stillness not of composure now, but of a woman discovering the exact size and shape of the life she had been standing inside. Wolfe rose only after Kramer had gone. He stood at the end of the table, broad and calm, and regarded the 11 faces left to him. "There," he said, "is your evening." Harold Vane came to Bellmar with the ledger. Gideon Bell struck him before dinner. June Dane saw enough to become complicit. The menu cards were altered. The service was timed falsely. The guests were taught sequence. The body was left in the study, and the discovery was delayed until the dinner had fixed the false time in everyone's mind. The dinner party was not an alibi. It was instruction. Father Broom murmured, "God help us." Wolfe looked at him. "He has had ample opportunity. We are now in the hands of Inspector Kramer." That was as bitter as Wolfe gets in company, and nobody laughed. Kramer returned 7 minutes later with Pearlie and the ledger in a brown envelope. He did not need to say anything. The look on his face did it. Bell saw it and sat down hard, as if gravity had finally found its rights. Wolfe took none of the triumph. He never does when a thing has become merely inevitable. He said only, "The last toast, Mr. Bell, was yours. You raised it with soup." And that ended the 9th chapter where it had to end. In the dining room with the printed lie stripped to sequence, the host exposed as the one man who had known every cue, and the house itself forced to hear what it had rehearsed into memory. The murder had not been hidden inside a dinner. The dinner had been built around a murder chapter. 10 The host speaks when the final thread was pulled. Gideon Bell did not break in fury but in exhaustion, like a man crushed by his own careful design. He confessed Harold had threatened to destroy him before morning by exposing years of fraud and theft. In panic, Bell killed him early, then arranged the dinner to make death appear later, trusting ritual more than truth. And so the night ended where it began, at a table built for 12, with one empty place left behind by the lie that sat among them. Gideon Bell remained seated after Kramer came back with the black ledger in the brown envelope. That was the first thing I remember clearly about the last part of it. Not outrage, not denial, not a grand effort to recover authority. He simply sat there at the dining room table, his hands flat on the linen, looking not at the ledger but at the menu card before him, as if the printed words on cream stock had become more real to him than the people in the room. Kramer handed the envelope to Wolfe. Wolfe did not open it at once. He weighed it lightly in one hand and looked down the table at Bell. "Well," he said.
Nero
Bell
Wolfe
raised
and
his
the
eyes.
umbilical cord
The force
of
had gone out of
witchcraft.
them.
A jeweler
Not
shows
intelligence,
Wolfe
not
awards that
pride
only ends
exactly,
when someone touches it.
but the energy needed to
Open the
pretend
bag,
that sequence
there
could
was a
still be
pure
governed
thin wire
if he only
like
kept his voice
the
low
watch
enough.
tied to a person.
"There is
The
no
jeweler
use
paid
now,"
to
Bell
get
said.
jewelry out the story.
"No," Wolfe
Hope you
agreed.
like it.
"There is not."
Comment next and I will
Laura
draw
Bell
part
turned
2.
her head toward her husband. It was not the quick shock turn of a woman hearing something new. It was slow, measured, and infinitely worse. She was no longer waiting to learn whether he had done it. She was waiting to learn how much of him had been built around the doing. Mara Vane sat very straight with her hands in her lap. June Dane had ceased to be composed and had become only still. Tobin Bell looked like a man who has just discovered that inherited confidence is not a legal tender. The others, Quist, Orman, June Lorette, Sorrel, Pell, Crail, Father Broom, Edith Morn, had all gone into that special silence of well-bred people forced to hear plain guilt in a room with good candles. Wolfe set the envelope on the tablecloth. "Tell it," he said. Bell's mouth moved once before sound came. "Harold came before dinner because he insisted on it. He said if the matter waited until after coffee, I would have gained time and he would have lost nerve." "That sounds like him," Mara Vane said. Bell's gaze touched her and moved away. He had the ledger in the leather case. He laid it on the desk and opened it page by page, as if he were teaching arithmetic to a stupid child. Transfers. Options, service fees, advisory payments. Foundation money shifted to cover early acquisitions, family interests concealed through others. Not all of it criminal. Enough of it dishonorable, enough of it ruinous. Quist said dryly. To whom? Bell turned on him. To all of us. That landed. It was one thing for Harold to threaten Bell, another to threaten the whole room. Bell went on. He said by morning he would either have my written agreement to reverse the land transfers, expose the concealed options, and place all relevant papers before proper authorities, or he would deliver copies to 3 people. He named Quist, Mrs. Vane, and a reporter in town. Felix Orman spoke for the first time in several minutes. Not me. Bell gave him a look of profound contempt. He preferred men with facts. That almost improved Orman, Wolfe said. And you believed him? Yes. Did he want money? Bell's face tightened. He wanted correction and power. He had discovered that the two can resemble each other, Vane said, low and flat. He wanted you stopped. Bell nodded once. Yes, and he wanted to be the one who stopped me. That was honest enough to hurt, which is one reason I believed it, Wolfe said. What then? Bell looked at the menu card again. He turned from the desk, perhaps to take the ledger back, perhaps to reach for the case. I do not know. The bronze horse was near my hand. I struck him. There it was again. No improvement, no self-defense, no fumbling accident. He had already admitted the blow, but repetition in front of witnesses gives murder its final weight. Laura Bell closed her eyes. Wolfe did not spare the room by hurrying. Once. Yes. And he fell. Yes. Alive. For seconds, perhaps less. Kramer shifted his stance and said nothing. He knows enough to let a good confession grow, Bell swallowed. June came in almost at once from the library side. She saw him, then she saw me. There was blood on the carpet and the ledger open. I told her if she screamed, the house would split apart before I could think. She did not scream. June Dane said, I should have. Yes, Bell said, you should have. Bell shook his head. I did not see Elsie, June told me later. Then the rest. Bell drew breath, and for the first time it sounded tired rather than angry. The guests were already arriving downstairs. Henley had begun service calls. Harold's service slip for dinner timings was on my office desk, because he had prepared the evening too carefully, as he prepared everything. I saw, almost at once, that the house itself could be used. The menu, cards, the servants, the dining room clock. The routine Harold had built the scaffolding for precision. I used it. No one moved. Even those who hated him most wanted to hear that, because it was the hinge between murder and the thing Wolfe had most despised, the arrangement. Bell's mouth twisted. Yes. Why? Because they were noticeable. A fixed oddity. Something people would remember and then trust the rest around. Wolfe grunted. Vulgar, but competent.
Nero Wolfe and
Bell almost smiled, which made him look briefly more terrible. I sent down the timings, he said. I told Henley and the cook the order was to be followed exactly. I adjusted the dining room clock 5 minutes fast. I had Harold's place set, his card laid, his glass poured. When the guests sat, the room was already ahead of the truth. I said, and Harold. Bell's gaze dropped. In the study behind the desk, June and I moved him only enough to close the room and later to make the discovery plausible. Laura Bell opened her eyes. You sat there with him in the next room. Bell did not answer. He did not need to, Wolfe said. You relied on custom? Yes. On the fact that a secretary at dinner is seen less than a host? Yes. On the fact that service and conversation could carry his absence? Yes. On the fact that the guests would remember sequence more vividly than person? Yes. With each answer, Bell seemed to shrink, not in body but in pretension. He had trusted ritual more than truth because ritual had served him all his life. Proper houses, proper meals, proper clocks, proper papers. He had built an existence out of managed appearances, and in the end tried to manage a corpse the same way. Gideon Bell spoke in a voice gone thin. "You let us sit there like fools." Bell turned his head. "Number like family." That was the meanest sentence of the evening, and perhaps the truest. June Dane said, "I thought at
Nero
first you
Wolfe
only
and
wanted
the
time for
mythical
Quist."
world of
Bell
wristwatch.
nodded.
A
"I
jewelry
did,
store's
but
fulfilling
once dinner
watch that
began,
only runs
the thing
on
had to
one
be
precision.
completed. Half
Open the
measures would
bag,
have exposed
Noir.
everything."
Hear a thin
Quist
voice,
said
like
stiffly,
the
"You should
watch
not
tied
speak
to a
as if
person.
concealment were
A jewel
administrative."
gift that's
Bell
truly
looked at
your
him.
story.
"For 15
Open
years,
lights
Nathan.
it
That is what
commence
you have
next,
called
and
it
I will
whenever
go
the
part
paperwork
two.
was decent." Quist flushed and looked at the tablecloth. "Good." Wolfe tapped the brown envelope with one finger. "The ledger." Bell drew a breath. "I took it from the case before dinner. Later, after the guests were gone upstairs or occupied, I hid it in the false bottom drawer of the office press cabinet. I meant to examine it at dawn and decide what could be salvaged. What could be destroyed, Vane said. Bell's voice hardened slightly. Number what could be contained. There is no difference, she answered. Wolfe's lids lowered. Quite. Vane sat like carved wood, and I realized she had not cried once in that room. Grief sometimes waits until justice has chosen its furniture. Father Broom said, almost gently, Mr. Bell, why did you not simply surrender when it was done? Bell gave a short laugh that had no life in it. Because, Father, I have spent 30 years constructing a world in which surrender is what other men do. There it was, not a legal answer, not a moral one, but the human mechanism. Wolfe heard it and let it lie because nothing better was available. Kramer moved then. He had been patient longer than his nature liked, and patience in Kramer usually means the cuffs are only waiting for punctuation. That's enough, he said. Bell looked up at him and nodded. Not dramatically, merely as a man nods when the last argument has already been had in another room. Before Kramer could step around the table, Laura Bell spoke. Gideon, he turned to her. When Harold threatened you, if you had given him the papers, if you had admitted it, would he have destroyed you? Bell looked at her for perhaps 3 seconds. No, he said. He would have managed me. That would have been better. Yes, Bell said. It would. That was the closest he came to remorse, and because it was small, it was probably real. Kramer took him then, with Pearlie at one shoulder and one of the plainclothes men at the other. Bell rose heavily. He did not resist. Men who have trusted structure all their lives rarely improvise well at the end. When he had gone, the room remained what it had been all evening, a dining room with 12 places and too much memory in it. But now one place had altered. Not Harold's, though the chair still seemed the emptiest. Bell's, the host's seat at the head of the table, had lost its owner, and with him the authority that had kept the house moving to false time. Wolfe remained standing a moment. Then, because it was over enough for him, he sat again. No one spoke. At last he said, "The case is concluded." Felix Orman, who could no more resist speech at such a moment than a terrier can resist ankles, asked, "By all means, Mr. Wolfe, give us the moral." Wolfe looked at him as
Nero
if
Wolfe
noticing an
and the
umbrella.
mythical cord
Very
of
well. A
wristwatch.
man who
A
trusts
jeweler
ritual
store's
more than
fulfill a
truth
watch
will
that only
eventually
runs
discover
on
that
one
ritual
precision.
leaves records.
Open the bag,
That was
Noir.
all.
Hear a thin
It was
voice,
enough.
like
The others
the
left
watch
by
is tied to a
degrees,
person.
Quist
A
first,
jeweler gift
dry
that's
and
really
diminished.
your story.
Pell next,
Open
oily
lights
no
it
longer. Crail
commence
neat and
next, and I
grey.
will draw part two.
Edith Morn outraged on behalf of all proper committees. Father Broomgrave. Dr. Sorrel tired clear through. June Lorette paused long enough at the door to look once back at the table, then went without comment, which raised my opinion of her. Tobin drifted after them like unclaimed luggage. June Dane was the last of Bell's blood to leave. At the threshold she turned to Wolfe. I did not kill him. No, Wolfe said. You merely helped time his death. She flinched as if struck and went. When only Laura Bell, Mara Vane, and I remained with Wolfe in the dining room, Laura said quietly, "What becomes of the ledger?" "Kramer will take it," Wolfe said. Then courts, committees, newspapers, denials, evasions, and perhaps, if civilization has one good week left, consequences, Vane said. Harold will be called blackmailer. Yes, Wolfe said, and whistleblower, and opportunist, and nuisance. The dead are very convenient for vocabulary. Ignore it. She nodded. That was all she wanted from him, I think. Not comfort, which he does badly, but proportion. Laura Bell looked at the 12 places, the candles nearly burned down, the polished silver, the cream cards. I shall never give another dinner, Wolfe grunted. Madam, that would be a harmless overcorrection, but do remove the private press. I almost laughed. I didn't. The room wasn't built for it. We left Bellmar House a little after 9. The rain had come back, fine and steady, tracing the gravel sweep and turning the lamps to blurs. In the sedan heading downtown, Wolfe shut his eyes and said nothing for 10 blocks. I let him keep it. Silence after conclusion belongs to him the way orchids and beer do. At last I said, he didn't break, number, he sagged. Yes, like a man flattened by his own careful design. Wolfe opened one eye. That is tolerable. From him it counted. I drove on through wet streets with the case settling properly behind us. Harold Vane had threatened to destroy Gideon Bell before morning with papers, names, and years of fraud. Bell, in panic and pride, had killed him early, then trusted the one thing he had always trusted more than any person in his house. Order. A dinner could be timed. Servants could be instructed, paper could be printed, witnesses could be taught by sequence. A death could be pushed forward if a host held the room strongly enough. But truth has a bad habit of clinging to underdone duck, false cherries, fast clocks, frightened children, and men like Nero Wolfe, who dislike polished lies on aesthetic grounds. By the time we reached the brownstone on 35th Street, Fritz had left a tray in the office, because Fritz knows the shape of endings better than most priests. There was cold beer for Wolfe and coffee for me. Wolfe lowered himself into his chair, with the great sigh of a man restored to the only geography he approves. I sat at my desk, looked once at my notes, then put them away. The night ended where it had begun, at a table built for 12, with one place empty in the only honest way left to it. Harold Vane's chair had been used to carry a lie through soup, duck, custard, and candlelight. Bell's chair had carried the host, who taught the house what to remember. In the end, both were empty. That seemed right enough. Wolfe lifted his glass. Archie. Yes, sir. Next time, a man invites 12 people to dinner in a house with a private press. Refuse on my behalf. I'll put it in writing. Do not. I have seen what writing can do. And that was the end of Bellmar House.